Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland.
Hi, and welcome to the Witches of Scotland. This week we have a live bonus episode, the Witches of Scotland Symposium. We're often asked by folk how to research the area that they live in or how to research their ancestors. So we decided to talk to some of the women whose researchers have helped bring the stories of those people killed as witches to us in the 21st century and find out what research tools and documents they use in their work. We want to say a big thank you to those who took the time out to speak to us, to Judith Gorman, Mary Craig, Norah Carlin, Catherine McPhee and Heather Upfield. And thank you for all who attended. And for those of you who couldn't make it, we hope you enjoy this podcast.
So, Judith, I think first of all, if we can just ask you to kind of introduce yourself and say what your current area of interest of research is, please.
Okay, I am I guess you could describe me as an academic, but I'm now an independent scholar, a historian. My background is in literary history. And then while I was studying for a PhD in the poetry of Mary Queen of Scots, for fun breaks in between, I would just delve into the history of the Scottish witch hunts. And then life kind of took me in different directions, and I've never got away from the Scottish witch hunts, but Forfar in particular.
And is that because you have a link to Forfar?
Yes, I moved to Forfar in 2005, and being the geek that I am, one of the first stops was the museum with my kids, and they have a display about the witches of Forfar, and so I had to start finding out more about them. And as I found out more about them, I would read things that just really got on my nerves, you know. If anyone's seen my Twitter from last night, my marginalia can be interesting when I scribble in books.
I saw it, Judith. I also write in books too. It's very cathartic.
Good. Sometimes I keep a pristine copy and I have another one that I just scribble all over. But but you know that it was the nonsense that was written that spurred me on. And I really got annoyed by people thinking, because people still in Forfar think these people were witches, these women were witches. So you have two sides. You have the people who think that historically they really were witches. Then you have the sort of neo-pagans that want to claim them for their own as witches. And so I just thought it would annoy me, and I would think, no, that people need to know the truth as far as possible. And these women mostly need to be recognised for having had a great wrong done to them.
Yeah, and I think that's what drives a lot of people, isn't it? From the people that have been in touch with us, there are listeners, through to people that are actually working away, such as you're doing, and have written about it and have put on, maybe created art with it or whatever. They want to tell the story of these people that were wrongly accused. So can you just, for clarity, when you say the truth about them being witches, and you did a little bunny ears, what do you mean by that? Just for, I know what you mean by that, but just for anybody that's not listened to your podcast.
Okay, yes, these women were just women. Or actually, in Forfar's case, there were several men, but they don't seem to have been executed. I'll tell you more about that later if you want to know. But so they were just, what would you would deem them as maybe antisocial neighbours now, people who didn't want to conform to the new Presbyterian Godly Society, people that were often Catholic, people that were disagreeable, you know, that's true. And they're all around today. I mean, you know, if you think about, you hear neighbours who are jealous, or people that distrust one another, or you just remove the past and put a modern day template on it, and the only thing that's changed is the law. So human behaviour is still the same, and it's important to recognise that and realise that if our laws are the only thing that stop us from treating people like that nowadays. So that's important to me, but also the fact that they were just normal people, and they must be recognised as they didn't have supernatural powers. You know, in a pre-scientific age, it would have been easy for them to reach to supernatural powers to explain, you know, why someone's cow coincidentally died when wee Marjorie walked past, you know. So it's important that these people are seen as normal human beings that were treated abominably.
Mm-hmm. So when you started to look into this, so you started with the museum, and as somebody that's had obviously a background in research, if you're studying for a PhD, obviously you've gone through university and you've got skills with that. Where did you start? What did you start looking at for the facts?
Well, first of all, just the museum blurb. And I looked at the museum blurb and then went home, and the marvelous machine that is Google. You know, having the internet is incredible. You know, it's the whole democratization of research, and the fact that you can go online from home and find digitized archives. So went on Google, and then went along to the local archives. Angus Archives has some excellent documents from the witch trials. And often it's more interesting what's written in the margins of these actual documents or on the back. So it's very important to have a look at them. Or in our case, Fiona Sharlaw has transcribed lots of them. So that's very helpful. Then books, obviously, you know, you look in books and you read the books, and then you go to the bibliographies and you follow those books. And that's really important, because I'm so mistrustful of other people's sources. You know, I never trust their source, so I will go and find that source. And it's lucky that I've done that in what I'm doing at the moment with writing my book, because one source quotes a book from 1776. So I got the book from 1766 and immediately read it 5 times over, and the source is not in there.
Oh,
so look, there's my 1776 book.
Wow.
But luckily, well, obviously it's not from 1776, but I was able to then go back, and I did find the source that the person has quoted, but I just found it somewhere else.
I mean,
so it does exist, but elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that if someone was saying, I'm quoting something from 1776, the person reading would go, yeah, well, that's probably right. Who would?
Yes. Yes.
That's definitely the approach I took when I was at university writing essays. I would make up stuff all the time, just hoping that nobody would go and check. But obviously, I was
incredible. It's not
yeah.
this. So, yeah.
Judith, you said you were talking about the internet and the great thing about things being digitalized. What was it you were Googling? What was it you were?
Oh, Privy Council documents. Okay. It's just fantastic. You know, a few years ago, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to look at them online. I'd have to know what I was looking for. Then I'd have to go to Edinburgh, and, you know, you'd have to call for them to be brought out and all the rest. Now I can just go online, and the one that I was looking at was at hathitrust.org.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, people have gone.
Who have gone?
There you are.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry, we're back in the room.
No, it was hathitrust.org that I was looking at, because you can get Privy Council documents on Scotland's people. and things like that, but you have to pay for them.
Okay.
So lots of the American websites, lots of American universities have them. They must have bought the collection so you can access them free online, which has been amazing because it's the digitized ones you're looking at, so you can read them very easily.
And what you're actually looking at are the actual court papers that have been scanned and put in?
The transcriptions of them, yeah. So that's just been amazing. You know, that's when the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, when you have a little scribbled note about someone, and then you go in and you can actually read what was said. So that's been fantastic, because through that I was able to find out that some of the Forfar witches were actually set free, and someone was offering supplications to the Privy Council on their behalf. And it turns out that that was a writer in Dundee, so he was a solicitor, and he was related to these people. So, but without that, I wouldn't have been able to find that. So
he was basically pleading, you found that he was pleading on their behalf to the Privy Council, and the
yes,
Privy Council effectively just released them.
Yes, on bond. And one of the people that he got 4 people released that we know of, because they were related to him. So his name was John Guthrie, and these were Guthrie sisters that were released, and one Jonet Howitt, which was the daughter of a Helen Guthrie. So the chances are he was her uncle. Because I've always wondered, well, somebody must have been speaking up for these people. Who was it? And that means he put his whole career, his life on the line, really, doing that.
Is that what drives you on to find these individual parts of stories about people now? Yes.
What's missing? You know, it's not really what's there, it's what's missing. And you think, okay, so they had a supplication, that somebody must have put that forward. Who put that forward and why? And then if you can find the reason for that, you know, the whole story bursts open.
What really struck me when we spoke to you for the podcast, and I'll put a thing up. People are asking for links to different things. We'll put links up at the end, and I'll also tell you, because there's so many of the podcast now, I can't tell you what number you were on, Judith, so I'll have to look it up and say. But if people go and look at Judith's as well, if they go and listen to our podcast, what I was really struck by was really that you're a detective, you know, and I think that that's what to me is really interesting about research, is that you're going in and you're like, hang on, what are they not telling me? And I know that you found some interesting things that on the face of it, if you didn't know what you were looking for, you would think, oh, well, candles, you know, you wouldn't really think about that. So that's something that really interests me. So can you talk a wee bit about that?
Yeah, that's come from the Angus archives. So there's some treasurers' accounts in Angus archives, because you'll find when you try to look at the witch hunts that there probably isn't a lot in the Church of Scotland papers. I don't know, to me, it can't be anything other than a concerted effort that, you know, everywhere where people are hunting these things down, they can't find the records of what happened during the trials. So that can't be coincidence. But what you can find is, you'll find that the Church of Scotland always kept fastidious treasury accounts. And if you know what you're looking for in there, you can find things like, enough candles to show that these women were being kept awake. But when you compare that to other prisoners in at the same time who are male, there's no, you know, pounds of candles being used. So you know the treatment was different from the start. So we know that's watching waking.
Candles, do you mean that they were using candles, physically burning, because they were keeping awake throughout the night, so they had to keep using candles for light to continue questioning? So
yes,
you see a huge amount of candles being used, you know that
yes,
questioned all the way through the night for days.
That's right. And you find that the number of men that were on the watch that were not watching the male prisoners. So you know that's different. You know that they're being kept awake, that they're being watched all the time by male guards. Things like they don't look like instruments of torture, but you'll think, okay, they got stocks made. But in the case of the witches who they weren't having outside or in public, because then they could curse people, that meant they were put in the stocks inside. And in Scotland, they had a habit then of putting the women in the stocks in a comfortable position and then putting lead bars on their shins. So that's a form of torture that you're not going to know about, but when you see the stocks that have been specially made, that pins were made for John Kincaid to prick them with, all of these things are in the treasurer's accounts. So it's quite incredible.
It's amazing. You follow the money, you find out the story.
That's exactly it, yeah. And with the whole idea of us Calvinist Scots being penny pinchers, so that's the ideal place to go. The Presbyterian Church kept a very keen eye on everything financial, so go there.
Perfect. Well, that Judith takes up, I mean, I could listen to you for hours, and I should say you're number 30 of our podcast.
Very good, Claire.
And we're having you back again, it was almost professional, and we're having you back again soon because you're doing the Witches of Forth for part 2, aren't you, Judith?
Yes, I found out so much more stuff, so I can tell you all about it.
We can't
Very
wait.
exciting.
A cliffhanger the last time, so we can't wait for the next one. So thank you very much. Get the treasury records from your archive, follow the money. That's your best tip.
That's what to do.
Brilliant.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Judith. Stay with us because we're going to have a round table at the end, so that people have got, we can have a sort of a general chat later on. But thank you very much. Sorry, Claire.
No.
So our next speaker is Heather Upfield. Now, Heather has written a fantastic book, a pamphlet, I think she describes it as this, that you can order from her. A booklet. It's about size rather than the content that's in there. It's fantastic, about the 5 women of Kilwinning. So I'm wondering, Heather Upfield, if you can just tell us a wee bit about yourself and what led you to looking into this area.
Right, well, hello everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here amongst some very heavy-duty researchers. Judith, you're doing an amazing job. I came into this as a member of Kilwinning Heritage. Kilwinning is a little sleepy town in North Ayrshire, about 30 miles southwest of Glasgow, and it has the ruins of a medieval abbey bang smack in the middle of town. Now, as a member of Kilwinning Heritage, we discovered that one of our residents, who was 99 years old, dear Dorothy, she has been driving the whole witch thing for years and years without anyone taking any notice of her. And eventually the chairman of Kilwinning Heritage asked me if I would do some research into Bessie Graham, because that was the prominent name, an old fable and story of Kilwinning, just to see if there was any truth in it, if we could just lay this to rest and say to Dorothy, yes, there was a Bessie Graham, or no, there wasn't, it's just a story. So my approach is going to be different from some people who came across the whole accused women and felt it in their hearts to make a start. I was actually led into this and became something of an activist at the end. So I started with the Scottish Witches website, which is absolutely fantastic, and found that there was not only Bessie Graham, but there were 4 other women of Kilwinning as well. And once I had that information, I did masses of Googling, looking at all the names from different spellings, Kilwinning, Bessie Graham with an E on the end, and, just seeing what I could find. I came up with a 19th century journal, a history journal, which had printed all the available minutes of presbytery meetings in Irvine, which covered Kilwinning and all the other towns in North Ayrshire up to Inverclyde. Not very many, but a few. And I also found writings by Sir Walter Scott, which were also highly relevant. And then I used other publications too, like the Lana Hidley and McLachlan. I also contacted Billy Kerr from Irvine, which is 2 miles down the road from us. He had been doing quite a bit of research on the Irvine accused. So we were able to collaborate. And I think that's important for anyone who is doing some independent research. Find out who else is doing research in your area, and you can help each other and, you know, draw on their information as well. So that was highly valuable. So with all this information that I was gathering, and I've got all the notebooks full of jottings to prove it, I then proceeded to start writing it up for a Kilwinning Heritage publication. And it was going to be just a couple of sheets of A4 to start with. It kind of grew as these things do. So I included what little is known of the 5 women of Kilwinning, but I was also very largely focused on the role of the clergy in all of this. And I kind of used that as my angle as I went into my writing. I've got a fairly academic background, so I used a scholarly approach. I used footnotes, and Word for Windows is great for getting your footnotes sorted out. I referenced every single text, whether it was books or online, and I have created a PDF of Heather's hints for referencing and citation, which I can make available for anyone who'd like just a few jottings on how to do it, because it is so important. I'm with Judith Gorman on this. I don't trust people's citations. I need to go and look at them myself. And I have to say that there is somebody in Kilwinning who will remain nameless, who has done a lot of research, particularly into the Templars, who hasn't cited any references whatsoever. We can't use any of this information. We don't know where it came from, whether he made it up, whether he spoke to Jimmy in the pub and Jimmy's uncle said something. So, you know, it's essential to have those references. I think it's particularly important if you're getting online sources that you always mention the date that you've accessed it. Because websites get updated or they disappear altogether. So when you're referencing something that you found online, always put the date that it was accessed. This is your proof that if it disappears, it was there at the time you looked. Now, using images, now this is something, I'm going to tell you a little story here. You have to be so careful with images, and you can't go online and see a nice picture and think, oh, I'm going to use that in my publication, because the rules and regulations and laws about copyright are so strict, and you don't want to jump into the kind of hole that I did back in 2006. I'd published, or I'd written a little booklet about the 30 churches dedicated to St. Bride in Scotland. And I'd used photographs from the internet, from the individual churches, and they were happy that those were used. But there was one church where I couldn't find any pictures at all, and I found one online and used it. So my friend Paul, who was the webmaster of this particular site, put it up on his site. And a month later, the pair of us got the most horrendous email message from the owner of the photograph, who accused us of theft. And this email message went on for page after page after page. And he wanted £700, okay, for his expenses. Otherwise, he would take us to court. Now, Paul and I both consulted copyright lawyers. I went to one in Glasgow, and Paul is in York, so he went to one down in York. And we were both told that it would really be not in our interests to have our day in court, that we would lose the case. He was perfectly within his rights to write us a stinking email if he wanted to. He could be as rude as he liked and as threatening as he liked. And the best thing for us was to pay up, which is what we did, 350 quid each to pay off this guy. So that is a little salutary tale that please do not just get things off the internet. Always check who owns it, who has the copyright. If you're in doubt, don't use it. If it's on Wikipedia, most photographs are covered by Creative Commons, but you still need to acknowledge the, can you hear my cat shouting at me there? You still need to put an acknowledgement of the photographer, where the photograph came from. There are instructions on Wikipedia how to do that. So that's some information that you might find useful if you're just kicking off. So the 5 women of Kilwinning, here, okay. It sold out in its first run, and I should add that North Ayrshire Council Culture and Heritage section very kindly paid for the first print run. So that's another thing. You might want to get your local history people and your local authority on board, because they can be amazingly helpful. And the way forward now is that my booklet is on sale from Kilwinning Heritage from their website. And early in 2020, I got a street named after Bessie Graham in a new housing development in Kilwinning, which is absolutely marvelous. It really is. The houses are still being built. I haven't got any photographs of the development yet, but as soon as the houses are finished and we actually get the street sign that says Bessie Graham Court, then I will post it everywhere on the internet. You can be sure of that.
We want to visit, Heather. We want to come and visit and see Bessie Graham Court. Can you tell everyone how you actually did it? Because it's quite funny that you just, the way it.
I know, it was serendipitous, really. Back in December of 2019, it must have been, a local councillor put out a message on Facebook to Kilwinning Town to say that there was going to be this new development, and asking for suggestions of names of worthy Kilwinning people for names for these streets on this development. Well, I immediately fired off Bessie Graham with a little justification, and I just let that sort of just go sailing into outer space. And I was very, very surprised to get a message from this councillor in February of last year to say that Bessie Graham had been selected from all the names of worthy doctors and footballers and all the rest. So that will come, okay, and we'll have a little visit. I'll get you down, Claire. We can go and have a look at Bestie Graham Court.
Yeah.
As far as memorials are concerned in the Heritage Centre, I'm hoping that we're going to have a little poster display within the Heritage Centre. It's a bit difficult where we're based because we're in the ruins of Kilwinning Abbey, which is owned by Historic Environment Scotland. We're next to the Abbey Kirk, which is owned by the Church of Scotland, and we're part of the Tower, which is owned by North Ayrshire Council. So to get some kind of memorial would mean getting all of these people together, and I just think that's just not going to happen. So I'd rather have it inside the Heritage Centre where it will be available for everyone to see. And to kind of conclude this, I've been having discussions with the Abbey Kirk, with the clergy there, because I'd like to have a service of remembrance for the 5 women.
Oh, wow.
And I have to say that they're very enthusiastic about this. And we're hoping that this will take place next year in 2022, when all the COVID restrictions are hopefully done and by. It won't be coming close to our Remembrance Sunday services, but we'll choose a good date. My feeling is that these women, these 5 women, and all the rest, of course, they died without honor and grace. And that is important to me, and I want to correct that. And I hope that in this little service that there will be an acknowledgement of the role of the clergy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Blown away by the work that you're doing, absolutely blown away, Heather. Absolutely amazed that you have engaged the church in this, and that they're so positive about it. And please do keep us updated with that, because that's absolutely amazing. I can say obviously your work has been genuinely inspirational, because I know of at least 2 people who have said that they are looking for new building developments in their areas, including, remember Shetland with Laurie, she was going to go and find out whether or not there were any new buildings. She would go and try and find out about names, but people heard your story about that, thought of the idea and thought, brilliant, that's what we want to do. So hopefully we have tales of many, many more people doing that. I should say that Heather's talk with us is in episode 27. If anyone hasn't seen that yet, or heard that yet, sorry, they can go and listen to episode 27. We had a great chat with Heather, so please do that. Thank you so much for what you've spoken to us about today, and hope you'll be able to stick around for the round table a bit later.
I will. I'm going to go away for a while now.
Real? Okay.
Fine. That's fine.
See you shortly. Okay, bye.
Thanks so much, Heather. So our next speaker today is Mary Craig. Just before we go on to Mary, though, I'm just going to do a quick revision in my mind. So Judith talked about getting information initially from like a local museum, using that and then doing a deep dive into what you can find on Google, finding books. Heather's talked about making sure, as well as Judith's done, about keeping meticulous notes and records of everything you're doing so you can go back and check. And one thing that's really stuck out for me there, that both of you have said, Judith and Heather, is not to necessarily trust everything you read, to go and find sources yourself. And I think that's really fascinating, because there's so much possibly well-meant information on the internet that really you need to go and have a look. And even if it's very nicely set out and it's a lovely web page and all the rest of it, unless you go and look at the actual source, who knows really what a person's agenda is. And there is quite a lot of misinformation, I'd say, about the witch trials and things that people think are true. And because lots of people have told the story and told the story and told the story, that it becomes fact, but actually maybe isn't. So I think that's something that I found quite interesting through doing the podcast, is having an idea, oh, well, that's what happened. And then actually when we've had experts on saying to us, well, actually, no, that's not accurate. So I think it's really worthwhile looking properly at sources there. So thanks very much to Heather. So next we're going to go on to Mary Craig. Now, Mary Craig is also somebody that we've had on the podcast.
Episode 37.
Which one? Sorry, 37. Did you say?
37, yes.
37. And Mary is an author and historian. She's got another sort of interesting angle on this. So have we got Mary? Is she still here?
Yep, still here.
Oh, Mary. Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Sorry, that was a wee bit like a seance. Hello, is Mary?
Hello.
Is anybody there? Yeah.
Hi, Mary. It's great to see you. Now, our episode with you, I loved that one. That was really fascinating as well. I mean, they're all brilliant, but what I really like about it is all the different individuals that have got their own angle to things and look at things in a different way. So could you maybe tell people today what your background is and what led you in particular to looking at the witch trials?
Hi, thank you for inviting me along. Great to hear everybody's different perspectives. My name is Mary. I'm originally from Glasgow. I currently live in the Borders. I'm a historian, but I'm what's affectionately known as a magpie historian. There are three types of historians. There are eagles that sort of soar on high and, you know, look at the great vistas of life. And there are hedgehog historians, and they snuffle about and find tiny little facts and build up the wall of our knowledge. And they're both fantastic. And I'm a magpie. If it's shiny and interesting, I'm going to grab it. And it might be witches today, and it might be Romany gypsies tomorrow. But it does tend to be, I tend to find people on the outside, people on the edges of society the most interesting. So that's where I come from. I used to go guising when I was little with my sister, and I used to always dress up as a witch, and I had the pointy hat and the cat and the broomstick, the full bit, get to university and discover that none of that's true. Initially got really disappointed and annoyed, and then I thought, well, what was it? And then I discovered what we're all discovering, that these women and men were ordinary. And that's the bit, because I often think of myself as an ordinary person. I'm from a working class background. I'm from a perfectly ordinary family. There's nothing exciting in my family, unless there is, and nobody's told me. But you know what I mean? I'm ordinary. And these women were ordinary. And the more I read about it, the more bizarrely ordinary it became. And that was the bit that grabbed me and fascinated me. And so I look for what is ordinary, that then all of a sudden you're in a cell and you're being accused of being a witch. Now, everybody was Christian at that time. And most of the people I think that were arrested for being witches, they practiced magic. So I suppose if you look at the term being a witch, it's quite a slippery term. You could say they were witches because they were doing magic. But they weren't witches in the way the church thought of witches, because the church was fixated with the devil, and witches were the devil's hand followers, handmaidens. Whereas these women and men were just Christian women that did a bit of magic. They might help you find a lost purse or whatever. So that's where my sort of interest lies. And my interest actually lies not just in Scotland, lies actually across Europe, because I'm quite fascinated. I often do comparisons. I compare Scotland, which had one of the highest witch persecution levels in the whole of Europe, and the Netherlands, which had one of the lowest. Scotland had the background of John Knox, and the Netherlands had the background of Erasmus, the great humanist. So, you know, you can buy your expert and see where you want to go with that. Where I go is, again, obviously source material. Check your sources, check your sources, check your sources. And I do sympathise about finding a source that appears to be wrong. I wrote a biography, a very quick story. I wrote a biography of Mata Hari a few years ago. Did that, sent it off to the publishers, and I got the proof back, and they had jumped all of my references out by one. And I had to go back through all the proofs and redo all of them. So yes, so I do understand it's really irritating when you think that's not where it should be. So sources are really important. But what I also find interesting are diaries and letters. In the Borders, they had a really high level of witch hunting. And the trouble was an awful lot of people in the Borders boasted about it. And so they would write letters saying, oh, I was involved in a witch trial the other day. I've been involved in 10 witch trials. So Accounts records are fantastic because you do get the candles, you get people complaining. They'll put in complaints about, I brought in the wood to burn the witch and I've not been paid yet. So things like that are really interesting, but also diaries where people are literally writing down, couldn't deal with my peasants today because I had to go and sit on a witchcraft trial. And the great and the good always keep diaries because they're busy boasting. So they'll write all of these things. So, Sir Archibald Douglas down in Kelso gets yelled at by the Privy Council because he's arrested and is interrogating 2 children without a warrant, right? The Privy Council basically give him a row, quite a public row, and say, you can't do this, they're children under the age of 14. Not that they actually cared about the kids, they were just trying to clip his political wings. He then writes letters to his sister complaining about the Privy Council giving him a row. I've discovered this since I wrote my book, of course. You always discover things after the fact. So he's writing, complaining about the fact that the Privy Council are writing to him to give him a row.
And how did
the witches are completely secondary to this.
How did you find that, Mary? How did you find the diaries? Where did you go to get them? They're actually in the National Library of Scotland because, of course, Sir Archibald Douglas, being the most important person in the entire universe of the world, donated everything. Because, the great and the good think they are wonderful. So they donate their diaries and their writings and their letters because they're so flipping important. And 95% of it is Anna I the greatest things in sliced bread. But in amongst the nonsense, you will get how dare the Privy Council shout at me for arresting these people in my area? I know who the witches are. Well, Mary, we're so grateful to you for wading through the nonsense to get those nuggets. Yes. So we don't have to. But that's fascinating. What brought you? What actually brought you to the diaries? How did you find them? Was that through your local archives, or was that through Google, or how did you come to them? Because I think those primary sources are so interesting, the actual words of the people that were involved. So I'd known the story about Sir Archibald Douglas. He quickly arrests, he grabs a hold of 4 people. He's got no warrant to arrest anybody, but he arrests 4 people, 2 children under the age of 10, a woman who was known to be addled in her wits, who should never have been arrested, and another woman. And I knew that he'd been sent, because I found it in the Privy Council records, the Privy Council gave him an absolute bollocking, if you pardon the French, for what he was doing. And I thought, with his personality, I thought, bet he was really annoyed about this. And I just wondered if he'd ever complained, had he written back to the Privy Council, because I thought, he's not going to take that. So I went hunting up in the National Archives, the National Library, and discovered that a lot of his letters and diaries are up there. And yes, indeed, there they were. And the staff up there were fantastic. They helped me find them. But that's the joy of the landed gentry, if you like. Because what they'll do is they will periodically, the families will have a clear out, and all the diaries and all the records will end up in the poor old National Library of Scotland, who has to find space for them, or the National Archive, the National Records of Scotland. And that's where you'll find this, because these are not guys that are going to lie down. And so that's a really interesting one to find them, just sort of, find, because you're right, the Church of Scotland records are not great. There's, to be gentle to them, let's say there are a lot of things for them to archive. The more cynical side would say it's amazing what goes missing and what you can find.
Nod some other researchers there. They're all nodding.
Oh yes. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing what disappears, and it's amazing what stays in. But the great and the good will complain about a lot, and so they will have things like that, and also local accounts of people trying to get money out of the church. See, the problem was that the crime of witchcraft was a crime against the church, and it was a crime against the Witchcraft Act, we know that. But it was the secular authorities that arrested people, guarded people, watched people, and executed people. So if you are in Kilwinning, or you're in Stow, or you're in Dundee, or you're in Angus, and you go to the local farrier and you say, can I have some wood, and I need some tar and some ropes, and we're going to burn that Mary as a witch, can you give me everything? And they hand it over, and I get burned. And then they say, well, who's going to pay me? And the secular authorities say, oh, that's down to the church. And the church goes, no, you carried out the execution, it's down to you. And so there's often arguments between the two. So that's where you'll get people going to their local courts to say, I've not been paid for the wood I cut. I've not been paid for doing my duty and helping you dispatch a witch. So little court records of people who are just saying, I've not been paid, I've not, and I mean, it'll be in amongst everybody else that's in the court shouting they've not been paid their wages for being the local forester or being the local bailey, because people did not get paid on a regular basis. You had to absolutely fight for your wages in the 17th century. And so your local archives will have lists of people taking court cases in the local sheriff courts saying, you know, the Duke of whoever hasn't paid me, or Sir what's his name up the road hasn't paid me. And in amongst those, you will get the people that haven't been paid for being the executioner, haven't been paid for the witch brothers always got paid. They were the first person to get paid. And those that sat in commission were always paid their expenses. But everybody else, no, you probably wouldn't get paid. Stow is a tiny little village in the Borders. And at one point, they actually put a £2 plough tax on in Stow. So anybody that had a plough in the local area had to pay £2 a year. And that was the money they set aside to pay for witchcraft trials.
Wow.
Which was quite far-sighted of them in a very sinister way. But there are very few places that did that. And arguments and squabbles over money is, as you know, Judith was saying, follow the money. So you'll get all of that in there. So that can be a really rich source of who was doing what, who's squabbling about what in amongst that. I found really, really useful.
I totally agree with you. I sometimes stand in the library at Parliament House in Edinburgh, and we've got one of the biggest law libraries in the world, and there are books all round. And you think any book, you can open up any book at any page and open it up, and you'll find a story of somebody having a problem with somebody else, because that's what the law does. It regulates the behaviour of people. So if it's a marriage, or if it's a court case about money, or if it's about, you know, neighbours and a hedge or stuff like that, you get the stories of these people, and each and every case is filled with this. And it's where we get a lot of stories of the people that aren't the high hegians, you know, some of the people that have been taken to court that wouldn't have their diaries in the National Library or anything such as that. So I totally agree with you. Looking at the actual records are brilliant. I might just add in there that when I went to the Orkney, I went really recently to Orkney, and they have an enormous archive section. And they said, if you're ever coming up to Orkney, just phone us, tell us a day in advance. We've got all our trial records almost. And if you look them out, you can come and see them. So just if anyone's going up there, that's something that they will do for you.
The other source I tend to use is local legends and local folk tales, because the witchcraft survey that the University of Edinburgh has done is fantastic. But that's not everybody. That is absolutely not everybody. And they know that. They know that. Love the mug. They tend to be the records of most of the trials. And obviously some of the trial records will have gone missing along the way, some of the smaller trials. But what you'll often get is local legends. You'll get a local legend of, you know, Mary the Witch from Glasgow, whatever, who maybe didn't go to trial, or maybe didn't this, or maybe didn't that. And so if you can find that and trace that back through the legend, you can actually find one. There's a witch in the Netherlands called Mechten. And there's actually a statue to Mechten. And Mechten wasn't a witch, but she was accused of being a witch. And the local legend is that she was a witch. And this happened several years ago. And somebody chased that story, and it turned out that she was accused of being a witch. And she decided to prove she wasn't a witch. And she said she wanted to be swum, because they swam witches in the Netherlands. And unfortunately, she floated. And so they executed her as a witch. And you just think, oh, no. And because, of course, the legend was that Mechten the witch was, and she wasn't. And it was she herself that wanted to be swum to prove that she wasn't. And you just thought, oh, flip. It just goes so wrong sometimes. But down in the Borders, we have somebody called who's Mucklemuth Meg.
Yes.
And we have Tibby Shields, and we have people like that who are thought of as witches. The Tibby Shields wasn't a witch, she was a suicide. So sometimes it's grabbing those little legends and tracing the legend back. And actually, Walter Scott's a really good example. He's got a collection called Demonology, where he picked up on all of these little legends. If you go to Abbotsford, they've got we know about their library and their archive, and they'll help you trace where he found the legend, and you can trace it back, and you can unearth a whole heap of people that were arrested, interrogated, and then released because the Privy Council said there's nothing there, we're not going to give you a commission to try this person, because, you know, you get arrested by the minister, if you like, arrested, not in the sort of legal sense, but the minister says, right, fine, we're going to bring you in. The minister asks a few questions, realises there's enough evidence, writes to Privy Council, and Privy Council gives you the commission to try the witch. But if you try to gather some evidence and it goes up and the Privy Council says, nah, there isn't really enough evidence against Mary, legally that's an end to the matter. But you're not telling me the local minister's just going to say, on you go, on your way. No, these are the people who get driven out their houses. These are the people who get driven out their village. These are the people who lose their jobs. These are the people who die of starvation over the winter because nobody's taken them in, because they've been labelled a witch. So these are the ones that it's a little bit like, you know, the frayed edge of a jumper. You know, if you pull that thread too much, the whole jumper's going to go, but you know there's something there. And that's where it's sort of frustrating, because you can't give definite names and definite times and definite dates, but they're the ones that are just at the edge of fact. And those are the ones that I'm hoping I can try and capture in some way. And although you couldn't, you know, you can't write a book about them because you might know it's just Mary or just Janet, and it might be round about 1650 or something, but those are the ones that you can catch from local legend. And those are the ones where you can, occasionally you'll get things in the poor records from the Kirk. Again, it's the money. You'll get mentions of people. We have one here in Stow of a Hobgreave. And Hobgreave is found guilty of pinching tokens. He pinches charity tokens out of the church, and he's admonished for this. This is the same Hobgreave that 10 years later is executed as a witch in Lauder. But the Lauder trial don't mention the Stow nicking from the church at all. So you know, you get little bits here and there of what people may or may not have done, and little snatches of information that just give you that richer picture. They're difficult to find, but again, you get snatches down in Kelso. I think there's 2 or 3 in Kelso and a couple in Jedburgh, where it's people coming to the church and saying, I'm destitute, can I have some money? And they'll actually say, money refused, son of a witch, money refused, daughter of a witch. And it'll be one line. It'll be one line in the poor fund. And you think, oh, who was this witch? And then you cannot find this witch. You cannot find this witch in the trial records. So sometimes when you get those little bits of information, it's really frustrating. But I think even if it's just a case of us gathering them, and, you know, 10 years down the line, somebody will find a fantastic source and you're able to put it in place. So even if it's just threads at the moment, the threads build up. So that would be my advice. Grab that.
Mary, that's so fascinating. I have to say an apology to Zoe, because on a podcast once we were talking about the story of witchcraft in the local area, Newport-on-Tay, and Zoe said, well, I might just ask some people. And I was like, what? You're just going to ask some people in the street, some old people?
Haven't done it yet.
They haven't done it. But I suppose that is an area of a rich area of people telling stories to one another, and while the stories might have changed, there might be some kind of kernel of truth in it that you can trace back and research.
It's a starting point. Yeah,
because people do say to us sometimes, oh, there's a story from the place that I live in that, you know, we've been told, and I was told by my granny, and I don't really know what that's about, and there's a hill there and people refer to it as such and such, and that must be related to, you know. I think that's a really interesting in as well, you know, rather than, you know, looking at it from a very academic point of view, where you're going and saying, right, I'm looking for this in these archives. If it's something that we've got people here today that haven't started doing research yet, but their interest is piqued either by the podcast or by the larger idea about the campaign, or maybe just by the fact that the place they're from has a story, you know, that could be a really good way of getting into it and sort of narrowing it down that way. That's fascinating.
There is another one. The School of Scottish Studies have a vast archive of oral histories that they've taken over the years.
Right.
And that's where you get a lot of stories. because their archive goes way back. And I remember they did they've got a whole heap of recordings from something like the 1930s, especially from up the Gaeltacht. Now, admittedly, the Highlands and Islands, the further you go up into Highlands and Islands, the fewer witchcraft trials because of Catholicism and various other issues. But there are a whole heap of stories up there of people talking in the 1930s, and they're saying their 90s then. So they were born around about 1870, and their grandparents have told them the stories of the local witch. And so that can just be a little starting point. And you think, now I've got a name, or now I know there's a story. There might be nothing, but usually it's something. There's something there. And so the School of Scottish Studies, as I say, their archives are amazing. And actually not just written sources. If you think of local songs and local ballads, there's a lot of witches in there that maybe there's something there that you can grab a hold of. And see, and it might be that the name's completely wrong, and it might be that the area is completely wrong and the date's completely wrong, but there's something there, because otherwise why would we still be singing these songs? Why are we still telling these stories if there isn't some basis there? So catching those threads somehow and following where they lead.
I love the idea of putting together these stories, these little snippets that have passed down, and then marrying that today with modern day capabilities with Google and with great archivists and with great archives, and putting them together and giving people their name if we can, and making sort of facts wedded together with stories, so that people are getting their dignity back, as we've mentioned before, that there's an idea there that this was a person and not just a story, and trying to give them some information. Judith, you held up a sign there saying maps on it. Do you want me to say something to Mary about maps?
Oh, well, maps, she was talking about talking to local people.
Right.
I found when you go back and you look at maps, and then you look at older maps, you find places like the Witch's Pool, the Witch's Knoll, and then the Witch's Den in Brechin. And these places are all called that because witches were hung there, witches were swum there, or just burned there. So maps, old maps.
Right, we'll come back to that one as well later. I think that's a good one in a round table bit. Claire?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Were you miming for a round table there? That was excellent. I like that. That's good. Mary, you mentioned before that there was some information that you found after you'd finished your book. What book are you referencing there?
Oh, sorry.
Borders Witch Hunt. Not just one.
That one.
Yeah.
Borders Witch Hunt, lovely. Now as I've said before, we'll put links to these things because several of our guests today obviously have got publications they're ace, and they're really fascinating just on their own. But we've also got some people like Judith who's working on a publication, so hopefully in time, Judith, you'll get that done, and then people can read that in the future. But Mary, do you find that looking at the sort of the actual first-hand stories that people have written in letters and so on, does that really bring it to life for you?
Yes, because again, it goes back to the ordinary. When you've got someone like Sir Archibald Douglas complaining about the fact that the Privy Council admonished him for locking up children under the age of 10. And his complaint is the fact that his dignity has been, and I'm thinking, you've got 2 children under the age of 10 locked up. What? And they actually say that he's not allowed to apply torture if the defendants are under the age of 10. I think, what has he been doing? And to him, it's absolutely ordinary. It's nothing. Yeah. It's the fact that his dignity has been, challenged. His authority in the local area has been challenged. And I'm thinking, he doesn't get the fact that he's got 2 children in there. We don't know their exact ages, but they were both arrested 20 years later for being witches, and they were described as being in their early 30s then. It's the mundaneness, it's the mundane and the murderous running side by side every time. And he doesn't see it. He thinks it's perfectly ordinary. And he also writes about things where he complains about one trial he sits in and he hasn't been paid. He hasn't been paid his expenses. And then goes on about the fact that one of his horses has gone lame in the same diary entry. So, not being paid for burning a witch is exactly the same as his horse going lame. But
it shows the real divide there, doesn't it? The real divide between the people that were seen as being, essentially worthless. The people that are
Yes.
accused of being witches were just nothing people, and it
Mhm.
didn't really matter, and they were doing something for the greater good. But you wonder how much of that was absolutely politically motivated to give them more power and more standing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
These were
that's
just
one thing.
pawns.
That's one thing that's really noticeable in the borders, is that, and it becomes a the more witchcraft trials you sit on as a commissioner, the more political power you gain, and the more political power you gain, the more witchcraft trials you sit on. Because I mean, there's the Scots, the Pringles, the Douglases, the Elliots, the big names in the borders. All of them are getting higher and higher up the Privy Council. They're getting more and more political elected. They're being knighted. They're being ennobled. And people that only sit on one or two, or people who sit on one or two and suggest that, well, maybe, I'm not quite sure, maybe we could just excommunicate this witch and banish this witch. Those that aren't thundering and screaming and bawling and shouting at these poor women and men, they don't tend to get asked back.
Right. Okay. So it's a bit sort of this is terrible to bring this sort of in line with this, but it's a bit like X Factor or something like that. They want big hitters, people that are going to make a big show and make a bigger deal and more drama. And I love that phrase used earlier about the mundane and the murderous. The fact that these people were just using these poor people or vulnerable people or disabled people or old people or annoying people or drunk people as a way to just give them more and more political power. That's just really horrifying, but also not even remotely surprising.
No. To finish on one small little anecdote, Janet Armstrong was a witch. She was arrested in Galashiels, and she's literally a little old lady in her late 60s, crippled with arthritis, chucked into a prison cell to await trial, or chucked into prison cell actually while they applied to the Privy Council for her. And she spends 3 days being shouted at, being walked, being watched, the whole 9 yards. And she's an old lady. She's got one dress. She's in a cell. She's in a state. She's smelly. She's dirty. She's brought in front of the minister and the Kirk elders, and they complain at the smell of her and the fact that her petticoats were all agape. And that's what upset them. She dies in prison. They get really upset about that because they've denied the chance to, execute her. Her washing rags, her clothes are sold for washing rags. And the amount that they spent on her on bread and ale for 4 days, 3 days, 4 days in prison was less than they spent on 1 day for one of the Kirk elders that was sitting. But that was what offended him, the fact that she was smelly and her petticoats were all agape. And it's actually in the minister writes down that he's offended by this.
So it's amazing.
And that's marginalia. That's just in a tiny little bit that offends. And it's those little things that just bring it all to life. Those little, and marginalia is a big one. The comments that are at the side that you suddenly go, oh, he's complaining about this. When you get complaints from John Kincaid about the fact that he didn't agree with the stabling for his horse, it wasn't good enough. You think, what are you complaining about now? And this is what he complains about. That the stabling that he was offered for his horse wasn't that good when he came to Stow. You think, right, okay, that's what's important here. But you're right.
They really must have absolutely dehumanized the people that were accused to a great extent. I mean, the only thing that's different about that is when on the occasions when there was people that had a bit more money or a bit more standing, but presumably it was expedient for those people to be removed for power in some way or for money in some way in a different story, and we've had the odd cases where there've been people that it's been recorded. And now, because my memory doesn't work properly, I can't actually think of any particular stories. Maybe somebody else here can, but when there's been somebody that has been of standing, but they tend to clear from memory, they often got away with it, didn't they? They got off.
Well, if you have more standing, you have more power. If you have more power, you have more influence. And also you have the ability to have legal advice. One famous person that didn't had all that and didn't help her at all, including, I think, her own father having been a judge or certainly an advocate, I think, was Euphemia McLean. Remember, all her stuff was taken from her and divided up against one of the people that was complaining about her as being a witch, part of her family. So
yeah.
But one thing, and again, going back to what Judith was saying about not what's there, but sometimes what's not there. Often we'll find in the borders that, for example, in the Stow trial, there's 6 witches in the 2 Stow trials, 6 witches, one of whom's known as the Lauder Lad. And his name has been scratched out. If you look at the actual arrest warrants, his name was written down and then somebody has gone back in and scratched his name out. We think his family had a bit of money and did that, but it's amazing in the borders the number of male witches that are not named because the families were doing enough to say, okay, you can name Mary and you can name Claire and you can name Zoe, but no, we're scratching his name out. So the family were able to do that. So again, now I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but it's noticeable that other than when they say things like, you know, hung several witches, which is a horrific phrase, but where witches are named and then all of a sudden the male witch's name is scraped out, I find that a curious fact. Just sometimes what isn't there, just saying what's not there or what has been removed.
And is that like so like a male witch and his name's been scrubbed out, is that because he has been executed and the family are hiding it because of shame, or is it because they got him off and then just pretend it didn't happen?
In that case, he was in the case in Stow, he was executed, but somehow his name was removed afterwards.
So maybe to save the family's, you know, standing in some way.
Yeah.
It's horrifying, isn't it?
And there's also the case, there's the warlock that lived in the dumb house in Edinburgh. Sorry, the dumb warlock that lived in the asylum house in Edinburgh. And I'm thinking, why is the dumb warlock being kept in the asylum house? Why has he not been executed? And he is never named. So you've got 2 men, the Robertson brothers from Stobel, go to visit him. And yet in the records, he's there in the records, and he's known as a warlock, and yet for some reason he's not named and he's not executed. He's just allowed to live in the asylum house.
It's absolutely fascinating, the stories and the amount of questions that arise from these sorts of
yes,
things.
And every time you find a source, you have one question: what happened, or where it happened, or who did it happen? You read the source and you end up with 25 questions. Why didn't that happen? Who did that happen to? Why did they say? Yeah, every time.
Judith has spoken about that many times on Twitter and stuff, falling down the rabbit hole of starting reading a book and then 5 hours later she's somewhere else looking at some other issue. Yeah, no doubt we can hear more about it. Mary, thank you.
Sorry, carry on, Claire.
Thank you so much. Mary's episode was episode 37, and no doubt we're going to be coming back around to have all these fabulous speakers back on the podcast at some point, because quite frankly, as you can see, an hour doesn't do it justice, and neither does 20 minutes, which is why we go on for a bit. It does eat into a round table, but we hope you don't mind that so much, because we'll all have an opportunity to comment in any event. Zoe, shall we turn to our next speaker?
Our next speaker is Norah Carlin, who is a historian that's been looking particularly at the area of Christorvan most recently. Now, hello, there's Norah. I'm just looking on the screen. Hello, how are you, Norah?
Yeah.
Hi, Norah.
Hi.
As we've done with our other speakers, could you just tell us what it was that led you to look into, particularly into witch trials? I know you have a historian's background, but maybe not necessarily in that area. So what led you to look into witch trials in particular?
Well, there are 2 things that led me. I don't seem to have speaker view, although I've clicked on it. It's okay. I can't see myself as the speaker, but I can see myself in the gallery. I got interested for 2 reasons. One is that I was teaching early modern history in Middlesex University, and I did the European witch hunt as a topic. And this was sometime in the early 1990s. My sister sent me a clipping from a local newspaper about the Corstorphine witch hunt of 1649. And I should add that my main area of, I suppose you might call expertise, and which I have also written about, is the civil wars of the 1640s, the wars of the 3 kingdoms, England, Scotland and Ireland. So these came together, and I started looking for the sources, which I will explain. But I want to start by showing you that we had a full-page spread in the Edinburgh Evening News. Now, as I say, I can't see myself very well, but this was last Sunday. The thing which they call a plaque, but it's actually like a notice board, an interpretation board, is now outside the Corstorphine Heritage Centre, which is across the road from the house I grew up in. And we had Claire there. We had the Reverend Moira MacDonald, who actually apologised on behalf of the church. She's the parish minister, and it was very well attended, considering that it hadn't been very widely publicised, and there's still some restrictions in Scotland. So this was great. This was the crowning of my experience. So I'll explain to you about, first of all, because I realised I didn't know how long I had to talk, but I will explain who the people are that are memorialised on that board. The first is Beatrix Watson, who was a weaver's wife, who complained that she was being slandered by the schoolmaster, being called a witch, and the result was that loads of stories came in saying that she was a witch. And these ditties, they're called, the charges before the Kirk session, where they included, the first story was, again, very, very typical of the witch hunt. She was a weaver's wife. She went to a farmer's house to collect from the wife the money that was owed for cloth that had been woven. And she said to one of the farm servants, if she doesn't pay what's owing, it'll be black siller to her. The clerk writes this down as black silver, but we can hear it being said, as many of the remarks in this account, which seems to be unusual because the Kirk session gives a very, very detailed account, not entirely honest, of what was said. Then it started, and there were other stories. Oh, she had an evil eye. Oxen and horses fell down when she looked at them, and she had strange powers and so on. And the last accusation against her was that she knew about the future, because she said to her husband on the Friday morning before she was arrested, when she wasn't supposed to know that there were charges against her, you see, but I mean, villages being villages, of course she knew. She said to her husband, Alexander Scott, the weaver, she said, stay in bed with me for a while, because this will be the last Friday morning that you rise from my side. And it's that kind of thing that does actually bring the tears to your eyes when you read about these ordinary people. And all these people in Corstorphine who were accused, none of them except maybe Kate Gibb, but I'll explain that, were not outcasts. They were regular village residents. There was a whole family of weavers who were not involved in farming at the time, but the people, they were not outcasts or strangers, although some of them had moved into the village from elsewhere. I will explain that I have been an academic, as I don't like being called. I've been retired for a long time. I was born in the Simpson. I was brought up in Corstorphine High Street. I went to Oxford University, which was unusual for a person of my background. And that's thanks to Holy Cross Academy. And I taught at what became eventually Middlesex University in North London. I now live in Cramond, and I've had 2 messages this morning that my internet connection is unstable. I live within a couple of miles of Edinburgh Airport. So when an aircraft goes over, it sometimes does disrupt. And if you see me freeze, I should be back in less than a minute. But I hope that doesn't happen. Right, so Beatrix, what?
Sorry, it's all good so far.
All good so far. Yeah, well, I'll get a wee mess. I'll see myself freeze if I do, which is incredibly disturbing, but I hope it doesn't happen. When Beatrix Watson, Beatty, as the clerk calls her, well, in fact, the person writing the minutes is the schoolmaster who accused her, so we can be suspicious about that from the start. But she was ordered to be kept in the tower of the church. Actually, she was ordered by the laird, George Lord Forester, to be kept in the tower of the church, and his baillie was put in charge of watching her. and she hanged herself because he wasn't very good at watching her. The second to be accused was Margaret Bell, who got her husband to bring a complaint of slander to the Kirk session. But it turned out even worse for her, because as well as the usual stories about her having strange effects on people, and she is made to confess to having met the devil, sworn to be his servant, being rebaptized by the devil, given a new name, and being one of and also having consorts. She was asked who her consorts, when she was asked who were those that were her consorts, the clerk puts a little colon, a punctuation mark in the minutes, and then she answered. Now, what lies between that being asked and answering is some kind of interrogation. And it's partly keeping people awake. It is sometimes using torture, but there are no accusations of that in Corstorphine. But keeping awake is torture enough, because we all know that that is done nowadays. It's standard operating procedure. If interrogators believe that they have the answer and they want a confession to it. And in fact, something that stirred me very, very recently was one of Steve McQueen's documentaries about the New Cross fire in 1981, and a woman now in middle age, who was an 11-year-old girl who had been at the party there and who was interrogated by the police and was asked in court at the inquiry why she was now changing the evidence that she had given when she was first questioned by the police. She said, the police was asking me questions and they was answering them themselves. I mean, we see it all the time on dramas. We know who did this. We know what you did. We just want you to confess to it. So this is what's going on in Corstorphine from the second case, that the accusation of making a pact with the devil is there. It's not just the charming, helpful magic and the harmful magic, but the accusation of being in league with the devil. Now, I think that George Lord Forester is to blame for this, because earlier in 1628 to 30, where he had an estate at Clarkington, which is next to the village of Temple, south of Dalkeith, he had been involved in the prosecution and execution of witches there. Of accused, I never say witches, excuse me, I say accused, of the accused in that area, and 2 people were burned on his estate at Clarkington. And although the pact with the devil is not a strong theme in 1649, Stuart MacDonald doesn't find it in his book on the Witches of Fife, except in the towns. But I think that it's carried over by these members of the elite that Mary was describing, who get involved in more than one witch hunt. So I see George Lord Forester as having a lot to do with why he was given the commission to trial the people who had confessed in the Corstorphine case. So Margaret Bell, her husband was an agricultural worker on the Laird's estate. She had her own cows, and she hired a young 12-year-old boy, and I know how old he was from the baptismal register, which also survives, and he didn't turn up for his new job at the age of 12. And once again, I can imagine, you use your imagination, and I can imagine this wee boy saying, "I'm no gone, Mammy, I'm feared she's a witch, I can't go to her." And she said to his mother, "Well, you'll get as much good of him as I will if he doesn't come to work for me." And to me, this is just about he's work shy. I mean, at 12 years old, we're all work shy, for goodness sake. That was Margaret Bell, and she, as I say, she was forced to name her consorts, confess to the pact with the devil, and she was executed. And we know there was a commission to try her, but it's just a note in the parliamentary records, and it doesn't name the commissioners or the accused. But that led on, because one of those named by Maggie Bell was Catherine Gibb, who says she was, who the clerk writes down, she was now near 80 near 80 years old. And she begins with meeting the devil when she was 20 years old, which is 60 years before. And she had agreed to be his servant. And she goes on to present day 1649, Corstorphine, where there were coven meetings with the devil. The word coven is actually used. And she names a dozen people, not all of whom live in Corstorphine. And some of those are then arrested and go on to be executed. But Kate herself was not executed. She died while she was being watched in a barn at Gogar. Gogar was where she actually lived, in the parish of Corstorphine. And it was on Lammas Eve, which is the 31st of July. And at 100 years later, the herd boys in Corstorphine had their games on Lammas Eve, because Lammas was the day after the day when the village's cattle was let onto the common fields when as the harvest progressed. So my imagination fills that in with the herd boys going over to Gogar when they finished their games and having a laugh, tormenting this poor old woman who had survived for much, much longer than most people. I mean, the average age of death was in the 40s, but of course a lot of people died before they reached 10 or 20. So you do get the odd survivor, and that's quite common in other things I've researched, who is very, very old, but to end your days being tormented by the willing audience at Gogar it's something quite horrific. As is actually the fact recorded that Maggie Bell held long to her confession, but on the way to the place of execution denied it and died denying it. I mean, you do get these absolutely horrendous, murderous things calmly written down by the schoolmaster who's acting as clerk for the Kirk session. Bessie Scott, who was Beatrix Watson's daughter, and William Scott, who was her brother-in-law. There are no accusations of charming or harming or anything like that in the minutes, just two confessions. And they confessed to the usual agreeing to serve the devil, being given a new name, being baptized with water, which was brought from a house or held in a sponge or something like that. And they were tried and executed. The commission was George Lord Forester, the Laird of Groat Hill, and two of the rising landed family minor lairds at Saughton. And again, these are the people who are involved, and they unfortunately haven't left any records of what they thought about it. But this is, it seems to be unusual that the Kirk session goes on being very, very full. Margaret Bailey, we don't have any evidence that she was executed. Her husband was a quite well-off farmer. He held one of the big farms. It was Meadowfield to the west of Corstorphine, and he came to the Kirk session and said that people were saying that Kate Gibb had not named her as being present at a coven meeting with the devil, but that it was someone who looked like her. And there was some argument about this, and there were people who said, oh no, she did not change her mind before she died, which indicates that they were there, you know. And you think, how could they stand there and say that? Marion Ingalls, the last one, was a dairywoman. And it's interesting that in every case, there is not all the evidence, but some of the evidence is connected with their occupation. She was a dairywoman. She hired cows from farmers to milk, you know, to supply milk. And she had a quarrel with a farmer. One of the cows he had hired to her was pregnant. And so, of course, she didn't get any milk from this cow. And she was said by people who, she had lived in Cramond and she had lived in Camel, which is now becoming a new housing estate on the edge of Edinburgh. And it's ceasing to be Greenbelt land. She had lived at Cramond and Camel, and she was said by someone at Camo to be an envious, quarrelsome and cursing woman. She was the bad-tempered one. None of the others are recorded as being particularly bad-tempered, but you do get it in Marion's case. And a woman who had 8 years before been a milkmaid at Pilton farm said that Marion had come to complain to the farmer's wife because she had hired out her daughter to work in the dairy at Pilton, and she had been promised milk to sell. This was a perk of the job, and the milk had been given to this other girl instead, and she had begun to feel ill when she was selling the milk in Edinburgh, went home, fell asleep, and when she woke up, found a dead dog on her bed. And at this point, the session is becoming a little suspicious. And the last recorded remark is, why did she believe that this was caused by Marion? Because she hadn't even spoken to her. And she said she feared her because she was not sonsy. And this means bad luck. It meant at the time bad luck. It now means, sonsy means healthy, but she's bad luck. She's a dodgy person, don't have anything to do with her. But Marion also was pricked by John Kincaid. He had pricked the two Scots that were executed, Bessie and her uncle William, and had found devil's marks on them, and said he had found them on Marion. But the Edinburgh Presbytery, which had played very little part, and the Edinburgh Presbytery's minutes do not survive because politically this was an incredibly important and contentious period. Somebody must have burned the Edinburgh Presbytery's records. Mary was saying, you know, what survives and what doesn't. I mean, politically, these were untouchable. They must have been got rid of. But the Kirk Session says, the Edinburgh Presbytery now says they want him to try again. And they sent the Minister of Cramond to be present. And Marion yelled every time the pin went in. There was no insensitive spot on her when she was re-examined. So she appears to have got off. But whether she crops up again somewhere else, or you can see that reputation kills, because in the case of Margaret Bell, she had previously lived at Merchiston and in the West Port, and you get people writing to the minister writing to the Minister of Corstorphine, saying, oh, everybody knows she's a witch. She's had a reputation going back 16 years, 20 years. So if somebody gets off in one case, they may well be turning up in a later case, or their descendants, their children, their grandchildren may be turning up as well. But I was asked particularly to say something about sources and how you get to this point. As I say, I was teaching in Middlesex University in North London, but still in a sense belonging to Corstorphine. My sister sent me a news clipping in about 1990 that mentioned this case, and I found that it had been mentioned in two previous histories of Corstorphine, one written in 1890, published in 1890, and then Miss Cowper's little histories, the volume on the church, she had published it herself in 1991, but it's been republished by the Corstorphine Heritage Trust. So I went to the Heritage Centre. I spoke to Frances McRae, who's the archivist there, and she said, yes, we've got photocopies of the Kirk Session minutes. Since the photocopies weren't always terribly legible, I went to the original manuscripts, which were, you could get them out in the National Archives at Register House at that time, but they've all been digitized now. I mean, even if there's something like that, there was something about another case that was, the book was tightly bound, and you couldn't read the last word in the sentence, and they wouldn't even let me get it out then, but they did undo it and take a new digital image of it. But I have to say the handwriting is very, very difficult. It happens to be something I can do, you know, from other research I've done, but I would advise anybody who realizes that the Kirk Session minutes or the Presbytery minutes are a source. The Dalkeith Presbytery minutes tend to record the cases, mention them, but not give much detail, except that it's quite clear in the Dalkeith cases in the 1630 witch hunt, these were about the pact with the devil. But if the Kirk Session minutes, and it does seem to be unusual, survive, and you know there is evidence in there, look for a historian and ask them, can they read secretary hand? And the response will be a groan. Oh my God, yeah, I suppose I can. And for the first day, I think, how did I ever think I could read this? But, you know, if it's a skill that you've learned, it comes back to you. So I went to the original manuscripts, and the Kirk Session minutes are now accessible on Scotland's People. The digital images have gone on to Scotland's People, and it's a genealogical site, but to read the virtual volumes, that's the digitized volumes, you don't have to pay. You have to pay to get you don't get the images off the parish records, you just get the names. And you have to pay for that. If you're looking for a particular name, you have to pay. It's not a lot. I think you get, I can't remember how much, but if you get the smallest number, like 10 images, it's not very much. But you can use the parish registers to cross-check the people, but the digitized minutes are actually there, and you don't have to pay for them. On the other hand, you have to be able to read them, so it's a toss-up. And that this is part of that democratization of the sources that somebody said earlier on. I mean, you used to have to go to Edinburgh, you used to have to pay to stay, you used to have to go to Register House and pay so much a day to actually do research there. But now they have, during lockdown, concentrated on putting more stuff on the genealogical website, Scotland's People. So it has, where it has our sources on a particular page, you can look that up. I also looked up the Edinburgh University database, which is called A Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, and it is wonderful. It's got so many cases on it, but there are mistakes. And I'll give you two examples. One is that I found that when I read the Christopherson Kirk Session minutes, some of the names had been misread, and the full stories had not been read either. You've got a word here and there picked up by the researchers. And the other thing is that you have to follow all the links to find out that it's got so many names. And one of them, which is from a different date in Christopherson, the date given is 1659, although it actually, if you follow it through, and it's a strange name, and I'm sure it's a misreading. It's a misreading, and I won't tell you what I think the real name is, because I'm just guessing, because the original is from the Justiciary Court records, and you can't get those during, while Register House is, to all intents and purposes, shut to everyone except PhD students. If you click on this name, you click on the trial as well. And the trial was the trial of a young boy, 15 years old, called James Welch in Haddington in 1661-2, who named 90 people. It's very, very unlikely that this one is worth following up. But the ones in Christopherson in 1649, those are definitely worth following up. On the other hand, Kate Gibb named 14 people, 11 women and 5 men, 4 of whom were weavers. This is intriguing. I don't know why weavers were being picked on in this case, but they were obviously being accused of having some secret knowledge of some kind, or else just not being farming people like most people were at the time. So the Edinburgh University database is unmissable. You can use it, but you can't believe everything you read on it. And the name of a person who is named among 90 in a different place is mixed in with the name of people who were closely investigated in the place you're looking for. In terms of secondary sources, I think the indispensable ones are, and they've been referred to, but rather quickly by previous people, so I'll say this slowly. I'll put it on chat if you want me to. Christina Larner's book, Enemies of God. That's an easy title to remember. The witch hunt in the witch hunt in Scotland. Right, Christina Larner's book is called Enemies of God, subtitle The Witch Hunt in Scotland, and it was published in 1981. But lots and lots of libraries have this. Look in your local library first. If it's not there, look in your central library, which may also have the book by the same author, Christina Larner, and 2 others, Lee and McLaughlin, which is called A Source Book of Scottish Witchcraft, and it was published in 1977. And you will, I've ordered a copy from Amazon, but it's to arrive today, presumably once we're over now. And I can't tell you exactly how it's organised inside, but you will find all the cases that were known to the researchers in 1977 there. That's one of the sources used in the Edinburgh University database and followed up. There is also a book that I'll mention, although it's infuriating. It's Roy M. Pugh, P-U-G-H, and it's called The Deal Vein. There are hundreds of cases there and no source references at all. And I said to Roy, because I met him at a conference, this is useless. There are no source references. And he said, it's not my style. Well, it may not be his style, and he may think that people find it more readable. And as an academic or ex-academic, I have been very conscious of that. And I've tried to write things with the sources as unobtrusive as possible so that the people who are interested can find them. That is absolutely essential. You give references that other people can find. A science colleague once told me that the essential references in science are so that somebody can repeat the experiment and get the same result. Okay, in history, you're not going to get the same result, right? People are not going to agree on what it means, but they can find your sources. That's absolutely important. But if you suspect that there might be something about your area, then look it up in Roy Pugh and be skeptical about it. It might just be a made-up story, but there might be something worth following up there. Also, I would stress the importance of local heritage centres. Councils sometimes have a heritage officer that it would be useful to speak to. I think Stephanie Leith in East Lothian might be a key person there, but during Scottish Archaeology Month this September, she'll be busy. Now, the primary sources are of two kinds, which have both been referred to. The state sources, because of course it was the state law under which people were prosecuted, the commissions, and the references to those are given in the Edinburgh University database, the Justiciary Court records, where you get some very full descriptions of cases, but I've not had to use them, or that they don't exist in that kind of detail for the Corstorphine cases. If they were sent to the Justiciary Court instead of a local commission, they'll be there. But if the trial was commissioned locally to people like George Lord Forester and his ilk, you will not get anything in the Justiciary Court records. And the Privy Council records, I didn't know about them being available on the Hathi Trust. That's wonderful news. So I think it was Mary, no, it wasn't it. Either Mary or the previous speaker had something to say about that. But the Kirk records, as well as the Treasurer's records, which are not very useful for this purpose in Corstorphine, I don't think. There are two sets of minutes, Kirk session minutes and presbytery minutes. The presbytery was a meeting of all the ministers in the area. And the presbytery minutes might report a case like 2 witches were burned at Clarkington, so the ministers didn't hold a meeting that day. And you get the warlock in that clutch of cases is named Patrick somebody, and he was in league with the devil. That's all you'll get from the presbytery minutes, but it will point out that there is a case there to be followed up. The Kirk session minutes, where they survive, they can give the most enormous amount of detail, like the details in Corstorphine. And particularly the details of charges and confessions. I didn't know how long I had to speak. Have I gone on for too long? I can't hear you, Claire.
Don't worry, Norah, all this is invaluable stuff. So we're just really grateful to you for...
But it's been an amazing experience going from thinking I was the only person doing this to finding out about Witches of Scotland, about all the research that's been going on, and finally to appear across the road from my old house in a picture in the Evening News.
Wonderful.
Who doesn't want that? But to the memorial in Corstorphine, it is very, very good to have that. The Heritage Centre there reacted very, very promptly during lockdown to contact with Witches of Scotland and knowledge of what was going on. And I'm incredibly grateful to all the people there, and particularly the archivist, who's called Frances McRae, and she has been a rock for years and years. So any questions?
Well, what we're going to do, Norah, is we're going to have a round table questions opportunity after everyone has spoken, because there are just so many different ways that with the researchers we thought we'd ask all the questions together at the one time.
Okay, yeah.
Just on a personal front, we met last week at the very small ceremony, which wasn't advertised. They didn't want to have to deal with COVID regulations and stuff like that, but still loads of people turned up. It was amazing. The Minister Moira has agreed to come and speak to us on the podcast. She is going to come and speak to us about the views of the church and stuff like that. So that's very interesting, because I was absolutely blown away. She gave an apology on behalf of her church and the local minister. It was, I suppose, quite rightly a qualified apology, because as she explained, she was saying sorry for what happened to these people and sorry for the part the church was playing, but was explaining that it was much part of a much bigger societal picture, which is absolutely the case. But what was such great fun was to meet Norah and her to point right across the road from where we were standing and said, you know, that's where I grew up. And to think, Norah, that and it was purely because of your researches that Emma Cowan was able to find the work that you had done and contact you, and that all this happened. So it's amazing it's amazing the work that you've done, and the fact that it's had such a positive effect. And I'm sure the trust themselves, Carstorphine Trust, seemed absolutely delighted with the work that you'd done.
Yes, and then, I mean, they're a very, very good local history group. I think they were formed in the 1950s. I remember going to their first exhibition when I was 10. And the other thing that's happening, of course, is the tapestry, which will be in the Heritage Centre, and it consists of squares commemorating the victims in various ways. And I've realised that when I was in my teens, which was a long time ago, I used to do a lot of embroidery, so I'm going to volunteer to do my little bit sewing.
Brilliant. Well, we look forward to coming and seeing the tapestry as well. But that's absolutely fantastic. I should remind everyone that Norah's podcast was number 36.
That was 36, I thought.
Yes, I think we've now recorded about 43 or 44, haven't we, Zoe? But Norah's was number 36, if anyone wants to go back and listen to that. And that predates our having the decision taken that the plaque was going to go up. That was just discussing it at that time. So it showed how quickly after those discussions took place that the Carstorphine Trust did that. And
Emma was keen to have something done between May and September, because that was when all this took place, between May and September 1649.
Yeah, so
and we've done that.
Yeah, brilliant work.
Thanks so much, Norah.
Well, thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.
And the others.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much. So that takes us on to our final speaker of the day, who's Catherine McPhee, who is joining us from Skye, I imagine. I'm just presuming that. Maybe you're not in Skye, are you?
I am in Skye, yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Okay. Fascinating as an archivist to hear how much everyone's using archives, which is good.
Can we thank you particularly for being here today, because Catherine currently is still suffering from the symptoms of COVID. So she's in by herself, and we thought she might not be able to speak to us. I know that I checked in advance that she was happy for us to say that. I think she's been discussing her symptoms on Twitter and stuff. So Catherine is unfortunately still suffering some symptoms, but well enough to come to speak to us today. So a particular shout out and a particular thanks to you, Catherine, for being here.
No worries at all. It's good. Yeah, I mean, well done for everything that's been going on. When did you start the podcast? This time last year?
We started the
we launched like on International Women's Day, which was March of last year.
Yeah.
And then we started the actual podcast in like maybe October. Something like that.
We started, we're like, hello world, we've got this idea of things we want to do, here's our campaign, and then 2 weeks later everyone was locked in their house in this pandemic panic. And we thought that nobody at this particular moment wants to hear about the stories of what happened to people hundreds of years ago, so we paused and then we came back in August, September 2020. So
yeah, it's amazing what's happened and everyone contributing. But yeah, I've just kind of been sick listening to everyone. I don't know if I want to sit now and go through, because there's so much everyone's mentioned about primary sources and archives and what you can use. And obviously that's what I do. So I don't know if you want to maybe save that for the next session or not.
No, please.
Yeah, I mean,
please just go through, because you're so if someone was like, I wouldn't know how to access anything like that. I would, my primary sources are going to the library to look up law books, or going online to look up Westlaw. But if I was starting right from the beginning, first of all, things like, are there archive places everywhere in Scotland people can go?
Yes. And also, Catherine, what is your job? What is an archivist for people that don't know? Maybe that's helpful, because you're sort of behind the veil almost, if that makes sense. So you're on the other side where people are coming and saying to you, right, what info can you give me? So maybe tell us what your job is, and also I don't know if it's helpful to say what your job isn't.
Yeah, I can say both. So the traditional role of an archivist is to gather culture and history from the area that you're in and preserve it. So stick it in boxes and make sure it survives, but also share that information. My job is covering Skye and Loch Alsh, so I'm right in the mid of the Gaeltacht, as was mentioned earlier. So we've got a different background to witchcraft, which we'll come into. So yeah, an archivist, my job is basically preserve stuff from the past, but also stuff that's happening now, which is something that I always talk about in my job. So yeah, archivist is like a custodian of society's memory. That's probably the best way to explain it. It's definitely not about getting lost in the past, but more like understanding the present. And for me with archives, it's a big representative of our culture and history today, but also about using them for evidence and accountability. And that could be anything from this whole campaign. These were women, but also looking at current events that are happening that we see, the modern day witch hunts, patriarchal power that we see that happen to all these women and some men because of different social status. Today we can now defy, disobey and disrupt that using historical records. So this is where archives shift a little bit. My main thing is looking at primary sources, so it's original material. And that can be anything. A lot of these kind of records have been mentioned today, so things like the church records. So I fall into the Highland Archives, so I'm quite short of breath, so I need to take my time. The Highland Archive Service is 4 archive centres across the Highlands Islands region. So our church records date from 1632 onwards, and that includes Kirk sessions, which are now obviously available for free through Scotland's People. They're fantastic. I got lost in them for hours. We've also got things like court records. So Inverness Borough records, for example, start 1497 to 1975. And something I don't know if anyone's looked at before, are town council minutes. So Inverness, Highlands Islands are from 1556 to 1975, and then that's when the councils changed. So you can get reams of information in there and in church records. And I know we've spoken a little bit about records being missing. Unfortunately, that is a nature of archives, but is also a nature of archives not being neutral, and about silence and absence of records. I tweeted something yesterday. I went down a bit of a George Orwell rabbit hole when I was looking through my notes, and he'd written about how history is written and created by the winners. Sorry. And he's saying that a history that's made and created by the people that were in power basically provides a experience of propaganda. So this, you think about how these witches were hunted and everyone got on board with this kind of campaign. This was because the winners and the people in power were putting out these ideas of what they were creating. So something between that is the struggle between what propaganda and truth is, and the need to verify facts, which everyone's mentioned today with footnotes and referencing, and making sure it's accurate. Also the personal memory against the kind of state-imposed records is massively important, and maybe more so where I am, kind of oral history, place names, maps, So it's quite a varied job, but you kind of pull in all these different sources that I'm hearing everyone look at. So I think the biggest thing to now is looking at how history is presented and understood. Everyone's sharing ideas and approaches to kind of get these stories that are hidden articulated out so people know actually what was going on there. So yeah, I think, do you want me to mention a little bit about the case that I pulled up and how that came about?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely brilliant. The one Skye witch, as it were.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
When you go to an archive, you will be offered something called a catalogue. So it's a description of a collection. So say, for example, I went to look at the High Court records, and each record has a description that's been created by an archivist. Now, there is an issue about bias. So this description was Rory McKeon is accused of murder on the Isle of Skye, and also for treasonous behaviour for wearing Highland dress. So these facts about him had been highlighted. In pencil on the margin, a later archivist had written as a witch. And I just found this by complete accident. I was looking for something else. And I was like, what? So I dug this record out, had a read of it. And as I'm reading through, I saw something called a slonach, which is your Gaelic patronome. It's how you know your genealogy through reciting your Gaelic surnames. And it said Catherine McKinnon, daughter of Lachlan, son of Dondu, which means dark dawned, but the word dark in Gaelic can mean a connection with the other world, like a spiritual difference, rather than a kind of shifty character. It's got a slightly different meaning. And I just, started reading it. And again, the whole records were all about this man and his behaviour. He was a man in power, completely running the area, the township. She went for help. She was described as an old beggar woman, and he tortured her in the house for several days, set fire to her feet. It's pretty grim reading. And then she left there and crawled from the house, which is still standing today, up to another part of the township where somebody else in the community, a day labourer called Donald Grant, took her in. So that's where I ended it after I spoke to you guys, kind of read through the court records. I visited another archive for the people that owned the land there and went through, picked out everything from that time period from both sides, kind of from 1730s up till 1750s. Got to remember at that time, we were also going through Jacobite rebellion, so a lot of records were destroyed or taken away. I might add, it was 12 years after the Witchcraft Act had been completely abolished that this happened on Skye, so it was a bit later. I've went through rent records, which are another way to find where people were living on estate. So these are private estate records. I went through maps and rental records looking for these names of her father and her grandfather. Couldn't find anything, but I know from maps where she was and where this happened and where the area is still kind of there. I think her case has come to an end for me researching. I just think it's that far back. I'm not going to get anything else at the moment. I've done 2 different searches in archives. I've gone through the Kirk session minutes. There's no mention of him, but he was somebody who was extremely powerful in the community, is memorised in history on the island and in other places as being a bit of a rogue, wearing the Highland dress and carrying weapons after the 45, presented a little bit like a hero, but once you start digging in, you're finding all sorts of stuff he was up to. It's not just this case, there's been loads. So I went to court records to find this. This is where I found the charge up against him, which of course he wasn't ever done for. So that can give you something. Here on Skye, certainly, and then the Gaeltacht oral history accounts, and just the nature of Gaelic language is another route to find these stories. I know it's been mentioned before about listening to people in the community. You would quite often have cairns built as memorials that have a story attached to them. There's one on Skye that's kind of become popularised recently. It's been getting called the Witches' Cairn or the Cat's Cairn, but it's actually to memorise a wee boy who reported seeing witches when he was little. It's nothing to do with the women at all, it's actually for him, but just the way it's kind of been twisted a little bit. That traditional folklore has been twisted, that they've made it about the witches rather than the boy. So there's things like that we kind of unpick and explain them to people. Actually, that cairn's for the boy that died, not for the women. yeah, it's quite a mixture of stuff. I think one of the other things you can look at in archives when you visit is just explain what you're looking for, explain the kind of time periods, why you're doing it, and you'll find that people will always be willing to help. Every archive's different on how they access and how they operate. Not everything's digitized, it's impossible, but also descriptions of catalogues don't always detail what's in section. So it might say something like court record for here, but not a witch. You might see a description of like somebody getting the candles or billing something, but you will not see any reference to what it was for. You really got to keep digging. I'll give you an example of a letter that I found in relation to building a distillery on Skye. So this is 1739, and in the letter, Lady Macdonald's writing to a friend explaining that she's trying to build this distillery to start making rum and stuff in the island. And just out of nowhere, I was just reading this, researching distilleries. It talks about second sight, and it says, she still preserves her good humour in the middle of every calamity. She gains wonderful reputations daily by her extraordinary skill, and her success is such to her foreseeings. She is sure of having miracles performed at her tomb when her mortal vehicle is taken. Pray give service for the divine and gifted. So that's somebody who was a landowner, a lady, acknowledging the Gaelic otherworld, like accepting spirituality, accepting there was something else. So that's why when I heard and read about this case of Catherine McKinnon, I was quite shocked, because the relationship between what we call the Gaelic otherworld and the supernatural is different here. They weren't persecuted, they were seen as respected members of the community.
We find that in Ireland as well, where the other world, the accusations of witchcraft didn't take the same form. Can you tell us a wee bit about, you were telling us there about your sources of finding about Catherine McKinnon, and you told us about her accuser. Can you tell us a wee bit about what happened? What was the story? How did Catherine and her accuser meet?
So Catherine is described as an old beggar woman, and she went knocking to his door. So Rudy McKeon was the tacksman, so he looked after a portion of land for the Clan MacDonald on Skye. He was a cousin of the chief. Man in power, wealthy. If you needed help, you would go to them and ask for it. And she knocked on the door, and he accused her of being a witch. We then find out that she gets taken into the house. I've actually been in the house as well. Taken into the kitchen, where she's hands and feet are bound, and they start setting her on fire in the house to get a confession that she's a witch. Later on in the court papers, he's accusing her of poisoning his men in a place called Letterfura. So imagine it's kind of the next village up. Now the guy himself had chased out everyone from there. He'd essentially cleared that village because they were smuggling from there. So he was trying to get it for himself. Then later on in the records, as you're reading through, you're getting more details that he continues to torture her. He then brings in 2 extra, we don't know if they're servants or people that were, forced to do this, or he said he would harm them. And then they just chuck her out of the house, and she crawled up to the labourer house, and she languished there for a few days before she passed away.
So
in the court records, he's getting charged for, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so if we can just sort of think there. So this woman trapped in his door for help, for aid. And one of the witchcraft accusations that sometimes happened is, at that time, if someone asked for aid, alms, charity, then you should give it to them.
Yes.
That was the way that society worked. If someone said, I now need help, you need to help me. Yeah. Not only did he not help her, but there's a real possibility that he saw an opportunity to use her to blame her for something, namely the poisoning of other people. Why would he have needed to blame her for that?
I'm looking at the records and looking at some of his past behaviour. I'm guessing just to blame them so he would not be accused of killing these men. So that whole instance, I don't know the full ins and outs of that exact moment where he was basically, there's an area on Skye where he was chasing the last of the McInneses out, who were known smugglers, and he was given, oh, kind of, well done, you've done that for the clan chief, that's excellent, but he murdered a lot of people. He's also at one point fighting with his cousin Alan, who lives like in the next township over, who's also a tacksman but a much nicer guy by all accounts. He's accused of constantly going around and trying to stab him. So he was just quite a barbaric bastard. You know, it's like, you know, how can you describe him? But the way he's portrayed today and how people talk about him as a bit of a rogue, fought against Jacobites, you know, and it's like, well, no, he actually was really, you know, he was meant to be somebody who collected the rent and collected the tax, ran the community, and also supported them. But yeah, just
but use this old woman who turned up looking for aid as a scapegoat, because the idea that she would turn up to his house for alms and suddenly, oh, I might be involved in being accused of killing some folk. Here's somebody I can blame it on. It's you.
Absolutely.
You've poisoned them. And that, as far as you're aware from your researches, is the only woman who had that allegation made against her. Is that right?
Yeah, on Skye, certainly. I've not found, apart from I'm talking about different sources, there are, I mean, the first story I remember as a child was a story about a witch, as a wee girl. I come from a family of bards, so I remember getting told this story. Every other account I'm aware of and that I've been reading in books, there's lots of stuff from the Gaelic or other world. So there's this like other realm of consciousness where stories about like how the Cuillins were built is a connection to a witch, but there's no accusations, there's no stories of them getting burned or set on fire or tortured. There's a couple of places on Skye where we've got like trial stones that were used, but they were used for everyone, not just for women. It was, and they weren't used around the witchcraft time either. So this is the only name, which that's what got me more than anything. Her full name plus her Gaelic Slánach, which is really important culturally. The fact that that was named makes me think she was somebody, or they had been a family of importance. There's no other records. I haven't yet to find anything of any other accusations. I think it's just a slight cultural difference in the area more than anything. When I was down in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, I was catching up with a friend of mine, and he was showing me a book called Road to the Isles. And there was a couple of extracts in it, and they were talking about the responsibility of witches in the Gaeldom, how they're not weaklings and they're not bad-hearted and they're not tricksters. They were rather highly gifted women who loved to be alive and won their place by force of character and right of service. And they were recognised guardians of the home parish and had a sense of solemn responsibility. So they were seen differently, these women, or people of different skills.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I took us rather off topic, and indeed would like possibly Judith to come back to you and speak about in a wee bit more detail about your research about the actual women, because we went straight into the researches with you and we never got a chat about that. So if that'd be okay, we might come back to you on that a wee bit. I'm getting a thumbs up from her. But so thank you, Catherine. As an archivist, have you had many people come to ask you about the stories of people from the past? Is that a common thing that happens?
It's every day in archives is different. So you can get, especially here, because of the effect of the Highland clearances being so prevalent here, you have people from all over the world trying to figure out who they are. There's this kind of, I know there was an episode where they talk about generational hurt passing on. It was something I was going to talk to you about another time, but through clearances, that's something that definitely exists. There's generations of internal displacement in the Highlands. So people come looking for those stories. If we're looking at stories around witches in particular, there is a balance between people using what I would call like modern age paganism and their own beliefs and spirituality against the traditional stories. So there is, like, when I think it was Norah mentioned the reference to milk and giving the cow, there's lots of stories about women, you know, messing with nature, messing with cows, or the fairies coming out and stopping the cows having milk. But then there's other stories here, old folk tales that reference them. So you get a strange balance of some people wanting facts in original documents, but some people wanting the myths, especially with where we are on Skye. It's magic. You get some people coming in expecting records to exist where they don't. So that's something you've got to be aware of. There is always gaps. Sometimes these have just happened through loss of time. Sometimes collections are held privately, and sometimes records have been destroyed. So they're not always there. It just varies from place to place. It can take a lot of digging. But definitely oral accounts are good. Scottish School of Studies is fantastic. There's also a website, company on Sky called Topin and Dulcas, who do English and Gaelic, and you'll sometimes hear recordings of people on there as well.
If someone was coming, Catherine, for the first time to researching in their local area, can they just look up their local archivist and sort of book an appointment and go and meet them and chat to them? Would that be something that you would do?
Yeah, I think it's different in every archive. So what I would recommend is finding out where your nearest one is. So you'll have archives that are in universities, local authority, private collections, local history groups. There is some databases that I can share later on where you can do an online catalogue search. But remember, not everything is listed, not everything is catalogued to find details. Best thing to do is to make contact, explain what areas are you interested in researching, and you can say, look, I'm interested in this, can I look at church records? And pick a date, pick a time frame, or ask them, have you got any research that's been handed in about witchcraft? We've got a few examples within the archive service in the Highlands where people have done research and given us a copy. So it can sometimes be a good starting point for somebody. Archivists are great. They'll give you loads of support and help in where you're going. The best thing to do is make contact. If you need an appointment, make one. Every service works a little bit differently, and just go in. Some of them will send you lists to pick from before you go. Some of them will say, just come in, we'll take some items out. And just ask for help when you're there. They'll show you how to use the documents. If you're struggling with reading, there's loads of free online courses that are offered to do things like that as well.
Oh yes, I would love that, because I cannot make head nor tail of it, and I know Judith, I've been talking to her about that as well, being unable to read the script. So there's actually websites that you can learn.
She's got the book, Scottish handwriting. Yeah, there's courses that get run through Future Learn that can teach you how to read writing, particularly Scots writing.
Wow, so that's Future Learn. Norah, can you hold up the book again if you've got a book? No.
Sorry, which book was that?
It's okay, it was Judith. Judith held up the book, Claire.
Judith, I didn't see that. Judith, you're holding up the book, Scottish Handwriting, 1150 to 1650.
Yes, that's the one I was going to mention. There's also one at the National Archives at Kew, the UK National Archives, which is called Examples of Handwriting, 1500 to 1700. And it has a page for each letter of the alphabet, which is full of the different ways that people might have written it at the time.
Thank you.
I've got quite a wealth of... I've got links and various stuff I can add at some point. The other one is, which Judith mentioned earlier on, is maps and place names. So you can use the National Library of Scotland and have that on one tab, and in another tab type in Scotland's places. So when they did the first edition maps, they took field notebooks. So there's, I think of an example that I've got off the top of my head. So they might have like, describe a river, and then you type it in exactly as it is in the map. So it's different because they're all in Gaelic. So we type it in and it gives you a description. So there's a river near us, we were swimming when the weather was good, and it actually transcribes to the stream of misfortunes. And it's connected to an old story of somebody traveling through that section of the hill. So every place name has a description on this website, and the ones that have stories that have been recorded are on the books. So you go on, I can send you links to it, but you can use that to search up descriptions. The other one is the statistical accounts of Scotland for online sources. You search them by, everyone's nodding, you can search them by parish and then read through, and it will give you history of the area, and sometimes mentions witch trials and burnings and kind of fantasy in there. But yeah, an archive, I mean, I'm trying to think, if you come to ours, you just tell us where your area of interest are. Sometimes, for example, in the Highlands and Islands, things like our church records and our Kirk Sessions records are all held in Inverness. So it's just a case of making an appointment, giving the time frame, picking which ones you want. But they are fascinating what you can find in there. Some of the minute meetings from town council minute meetings are brilliant.
I mean, very, very recently we had the example of the digitalisation of town council meetings, and that lady becoming super famous.
Yeah.
Was she? The one where she was saying, "You have no authority here," was
Yeah.
pointed at her. She's now become worldwide famous because these council meetings are a microcosm of life. You saw people getting so het up about things and getting angry, and how it all kicked off. And I imagine it would have just been the same back then, except someone would be writing it down rather than having it streamed live.
Yeah. And as already mentioned, also smaller collections, personal papers, estate records. Again, it's the people who are wealthy in the community corresponding to each other and making note of events, old literature. There's a book that's written by Martin called The Description of the Western Isles. And you quite often find people who were maybe of kind of gentry would write these descriptive books, but they'd go and interview people in the community. There's an account in one of the books where it's the only way to describe it. He's a blacksmith and he's doing some kind of ceremonial healing. It might be like a modern day, like Reiki or something, if you were to look at it from a modern. So sometimes they're really good sources, or old books as people are traveling around the country, describing what they're seeing.
Yeah, certainly. One of the very first things that I came to about the witchcraft trials where I really connected was I was actually researching the Bloody Mackenzie instead. And it was only as an aside that someone was recording that the Bloody Mackenzie had said that he had seen a woman be tortured and said, can you be a witch and not know it? And that was my sort of first light bulb moment that I realised these people were people and not, funny stories from the past. I see funny in inverted commas, not funny, but strange stories from the past where I really properly connected with it. So it's funny that your research can sometimes be ancillary, but it assists your understanding of the whole picture, even if you're researching just about that time, that these sorts of things pop up all over the place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the primary sources are the great way to start getting into an archive. I mean, there is a wealth online, but I think sometimes, like my own opinion is, sometimes when you're looking at stuff online, you might miss the context. So if you go into an archive and you get given a bundle of letters, like I looked through, you're going to read them in order how that person left them. Most archives don't reorganize. It's how that person bundled them up in 1750. That we try and keep something called original order. So sometimes if you're just reading a page on a screen, you might miss 4 or 5 pages before. And there might be more readings. That was the case with Catherine McKinnon. The first document I read was 6 pages long. And it wasn't until I got document 18, I really started getting to what was going on.
You must, I mean, someone said, was it Zoe earlier on, you said about being detectives?
Yeah, I do think of it as that, that you're kind of, we've described it in different ways, rabbit hole and things like that, but it's got to be that curiosity that you're digging, and you don't just want to read what somebody else has written in a book. You're using all these different things to formulate your own idea and interpretation, and use the facts that are there to do that. I don't mean make it up and go off piste, but I just mean going and finding details to look into your area. I do think it's very much like a detective.
Yeah, it's I mean, those court records, I would recommend everyone to start getting into them. And some that can be quite long-winded when you're reading it, but you can snippets. I mean, one of the things that really jumped out at me with Rory McKee and his defence in the original warrant was that it didn't specify the woman's name or the time of the alleged torture took place, so he should be released. And then they got her name, and they put it in full and her family name. That was his way of trying to wriggle out why he didn't name her.
Yeah, that would be in the modern day a plea to the relevancy. It would. You've not made, because it would be for me to say, for example, to you, Catherine, I would say, you did shout at someone, and your first question is, well, how do I know how to defend myself here? I don't know who you're talking about, who I shouted at. I might have, I might not have. I need to know who it would be. So we would take a plea to the relevancy there. That would be the first thing to do. So whoever his lawyer was at least right in that regard.
It's I mean, it was a total eye-opener for me, to be honest, going in. I didn't expect to find it in the court records. It was the last thing I was looking for. But it's been interesting. It's addictive, as you all know, going through them. Which I think where else good sources are. Yeah, I would say to get into an archive, find out what they have in their collections. Now, some archives will have online catalogues where you can search by area, topic. They're all different, and I can get some links for you after as well on those. And things like, if you're looking at where you live now, that parish or that town might have been in a different area before. So you might find, so like Skye and Lochalsh has got parts like from Ross and Cromarty that weren't here until 1975. So as land ownerships moved, some collections to some areas might be hiding somewhere else. It's just these kind of geographical, political changes.
Yeah,
where records are held. Yeah,
that's like the maps thing, isn't it? Don't just assume that because something's in your area now, it would have been in your area then.
Yeah, that
is really that's really quite helpful too. I'm acutely aware of the fact that you're doing this with limited breath. How are you feeling?
I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm just I'm just trying to think of other sources. I've kind of been, since it's been a while since I spoke to you. That was last year.
It is kind of let everyone know that you were right. It was right. One of the very early ones we did with you. Hang on, number 11, number 12.
Yeah,
that was early days. That we had you on, number 12 in the show, and we go into a lot of detail about what you're talking about there, but not talking necessarily about research.
Aye.
Well, Catherine, what we could do is we could go back to Judith, who started, and she was able to tell us about her sources and stuff, but we never asked her, as we asked everyone else, to speak about the people in her area. So thank you very much for that. And perhaps, Judith, would you mind speaking to us a wee bit? It's just that
no, that would be awful. That would be awful.
We asked everyone else, and I thought, because your start was a little bit discombobulated, we got straight into the research, and you never got an opportunity to speak about the people. Do you want to give us a sort of 5-10 minute overview of what your researchers have got? I know that's impossible to narrow it down to that time, but if you can.
Just stop me when you've had enough, okay? I just found out the most fascinating stuff about people in the area. Being able to put, you get a name and you get an accusation, and then you can build from that someone's life based on minute pieces of information. But if you pull them all in from different sources, you can make someone human again. We're all storytellers, and people say that the way that you keep people alive is by telling stories about them. Well, these people's stories have been forgotten or buried or misrepresented for so long. Now we are rebuilding the reputations. So one of the characters in particular in Forfar, it all seems to, the 1661-62 cases are all around this woman called Helen Guthrie. And she describes herself as a witch. Her nickname from the devil is the White Witch, but that's not to do with neo-paganism or anything like that. That is, or the idea of a good witch or a bad witch. I'm putting around 52 years old at the time, so I'm guessing she either had white hair or she just had very pale skin. Yeah, exactly. So, but she does describe herself as a witch, and I looked into her life. Seemingly that there wasn't very much known about her, but then researching documents and marginalia again, I found out that Helen murdered her 6-year-old sister when she was 10 years old in Dundee. But it sounds like an accident. She knocked her sister over, and her sister hit her head and split her head, and she never recovered. Now, Helen's described as being quite an evil person. If you read the documents from the Heed bombers, she was quite an evil person. But when you read about, it was written in the margins of her confession that she had begged her mum her whole life to forgive her. And even on her deathbed, her mum refused when Helen was pleading for forgiveness. So that's somebody who feels remorse. This is not some kind of psychopathic human being. So what seems to have happened is Helen grew up in Dundee, and then she turns up in Forfar during the witch trials, 61, 62. But written somewhere else is a bit about how she went abroad with the Egyptians. So at the time, the Romany gypsies in Scotland were known as Egyptians. And we were talking about oral histories and folk tales. And well, there's a folk song called Johnny Fa. And it's quite famous. It's still famous. If you YouTube it today, you'll get someone playing a version of it. Now, Johnny Fa was a king of the gypsies, and he had an encampment outside Forfar at different times of the year. Well, it would seem that she ran away and she stayed with them, and that's where she would have been taught things like fortune telling, you know, and people, she would have gone out and used them to extort money from people. You know, we have people coming around. One was in the hairdressers the other day selling clothes pegs, and everyone in the hairdressers was too superstitious not to buy one. So things like that. Helen was always an outsider. So she was an outsider in her family because of what she did. It seems that she ran away with the gypsies. So she's an outsider there because she's not one of them. Then she moves to Forfar, and she's an outsider because she was a gypsy. And she seems to have had a colourful life. She admits to have having adultery. And she seems to be someone who was happy to extort money from people in the local community by using the skills that she'd learned when she was with the gypsies. But she also seems to have been an alcoholic. So Helen and her group of people all seem to have had they liked to drink, and they liked to dance, and there was always someone playing a pipe at their meetings. So this isn't, you know, people who are meeting in graveyards and they're keeping the town up because they're going to the local brewer in the middle of the night to try and get more beer, and they're going to the local whiskey merchant to get more whiskey in the middle of the night. Tiny town, they're knocking them up. They're all antisocial behaviour is rife. And that's what seems to have got these people noticed. All of them were accused of pacts with the devil in Forfar. That the demonic pact is huge. They all describe meetings with him, nicknames from him, having sex with him. One of the women in Forfar was arrested just for being beautiful. And the towns, the people in charge of the town, they went after her for years. So she got arrested in 1662 and wasn't released on bond until 1664 because they kept retrying her. They kept trying to get enough people to come forward and speak against her, and they wouldn't. And her name was Elspeth Bruce. So I have, interestingly, last night, here's a roll I have. This is a list of names. So I have to cross-reference them all with each other from various sources.
Wow.
So one's the calendar of cases of...
For those that may be listening to this in any later podcast, Judith has sellotaped together, I don't know how many A4 pieces of paper.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a big roll. And that's like the calendar of Scotch cases of witchcraft in Scotland. I used that. I've used a local pamphlet.
Oh, I've not seen the calendar. The calendar.
It's excellent because it gives you a bit more information about some of them.
And who's that by, Judith?
That is by George F. Black. And there's a brilliant publisher. So I have all these books that have been republished. If you don't try and buy them on Amazon when you see them that someone's selling it for £304, Go to eBay a lot of the time and just type in the name, and you can get this company. They're published by Wentworth Press. But anyway, it's old books, and they're deemed to be of scholarly interest. You can pick these up for £20 each.
Wow.
Sometimes cheaper if you get them secondhand, but they're great if you're looking at your local area. And these are local histories that were written maybe 200 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, and maybe even longer if it's the Dundee one of 1776.
Yeah.
So eBay is the place for picking up these things. The source book of Scottish witchcraft.
Yes.
Someone mentioned earlier. That's excellent. So tie that together with the calendar and the website, you know, the Scottish Witchcraft website, the Edinburgh one, and you'll come up with lots of names. Another one I used was brilliant, Antiquities of Scotland. Which is now owned by the National Museum, but the Antiquities of Scotland online, they had transcripts of the confessions of the Forfar witches, and that's full of information. So that's another brilliant source for names. So now I have to cross-reference all these people that were mentioned in different ones and see if I can come up with an exact figure of the number of people.
That's amazing, because the amount is just going up and up. The more you research, the more names you're finding, isn't it?
It is incredible, and it's all for petty things, but you can tell that the authorities in Forfar were after these people. They wanted this group, and they wanted to get rid of them, you know, cleanse out the troublemakers. But also there's, you know, a couple of them were definitely Catholics, so they would mention things like Hail Marys or whatever in spells that they were doing. I know it's not the same all over Scotland, but Forfar's interesting as it ties in with the Pendle witch trials. The ideas for both of them seem to be similar, and it seems to be to root out Catholics in the area.
Yeah, we're certainly finding that, and certain areas had particular issue with Catholicism, and then some areas it just doesn't seem to have it at all. It's quite strange that there wasn't.
That's right. There seems to be different driving forces behind each, you know, witch trial and witch hunt. And I've been looking at the Brechin witches as well, and I'm not going to have the space to include them in my book, because in 1649 there was a great witch hunt in Brechin. And I think I'd mentioned to you guys on Twitter that I found a relative, which I never expected to find. You know, you always joke about these things, but I did my own family history research. So Scotland's people and Find My Past are brilliant for resources as well.
I should actually say Ancestry.com have incorporated the survey of Scottish witchcraft into their databases to see if anyone could transfer themselves back and link with anyone from that. Unfortunately, you have to obviously pay. Ancestry.com as a private company, but there's a way to research that as well. Judith, we got you started.
Sorry.
No, and there's so much more to talk about. We want to talk to you all, but I'm just looking at the time, and we might run out of time if we don't have a sort of a round table. Zoe, are you wanting to chair said round table, or
I think so. Nora's got her hand up though. Looks like Nora's got something to add.
Yeah, it was something to add to what Judith was saying, because when she mentioned old histories, you can often get these on archive.org. This started as the Gutenberg project in the 1950s to get printed books digitized, and it's been going ever since. Most of the works included are sourced from American universities and libraries and legal libraries and things like that. But you do often find local histories from the UK have been digitized and they're on there. So it's a simple website to access. It's called archive.org, and that's it. But you can get old books from the 16th century, from the time that books were first printed. You might find your local source on there.
Well, we've got
another
the wealth.
Source is canmore.org.
Oh yes.
Okay, because if you can find out information about cremains and stuff. I find that there's actually quite a lot of cremains about the place, or you know, bits of human remains that have been left in sites where they know people were executed for witchcraft, and Canmore often has information about that on there. It'll mention them.
Canmore's brilliant because we've got one which is HER for Highlands and Islands, so there's two Canmore and then there's one for the Highlands and Islands in particular, and you can go to an area and it all has wee dots, you can click on them. So if you know an area where there's been maybe a high concentration of accusations of witchcraft, you can click on it and it'll often give you descriptions. So for example, here we would have a Sheehan, which is a fairy hill, which are ancient burial sites, and they're ring fenced as places of spiritual significance. And ours is just, again, it's a different kind of, they're all Gaelic and stuff, but it is a really good source, Canmore. And when you click on that, it'll expand out and give you books and extra reading. Again, links in the maps and the place names websites we can share.
Yeah. We've got lots of stuff that we can put together as a resource, you know, between what Heather was saying about her sort of hints and tips, through all the different books that have been recommended, through the publications that the speakers today have themselves written or been involved with. We've got actually quite a wealth of resources. So when Claire and I can manage to do that, we'll put together a whole bunch of links and everything, so you can go and find these things, because it's great to be able to get this all from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I'm not calling it horses, but
don't call guest horses, Zoe.
No, I didn't mean that. I like horses, it's not a bad thing, but it's been really brilliant to hear you all individually. I think it'd be nice now to kind of have a bit of a round table. Not entirely sure how we'll do this, but what I would say is to take questions from the audience. If you can write in the chat box, and then Claire and I will do the questions and then ask the different people if that's okay, rather than people unmuting and speaking, because I think that'll become a total rammy. And as a school teacher, I can't cope with that. So if you could put the questions in the chat box if you've got any, and then we'll put them to people if that's okay. So does anybody have any questions for our esteemed guests today?
Can I just say something while people are typing their wonderful questions?
Naturally.
We were talking about the fact that obviously the source material is always written by the winners. To get a slightly different perspective, you might also look at foreign archives. For example, there are archives in Bavaria, and they hold records of letters written to the presbyteries in Bavaria saying, why are we not chasing witches the way they do in Scotland? They're very good at chasing witches over there.
Wow.
So if you look at some of it, because people travel, there was a lot of travel. If you look at the countries that were Protestant, so Scotland, the Netherlands and the German states, a lot of the ministers were sending letters to each other. So what you'll get a lot of the German states thinking Scotland's wonderful because we're burning witches and isn't it fantastic? And then you'll get because they tended to be a slightly more Calvinist, and then you get the Lutheran ministers in like the Netherlands, Belgium, what was the Low Countries saying, isn't it terrible what they're doing in Scotland? And that's in the National Archives in The Hague. So it's just to give you that slightly different perspective of foreign travellers and what they thought we were up to at the time. So just
that's fascinating. The way that it's fascinating though, isn't it? Because if you think about the statistics across Europe, how expert Scotland seemed to be at doing it, and what were the drivers for that? I find that really interesting, why Scotland was so into the whole thing. It's shocking. And I think that's why there's relevance today for us as a country to look for pardon and the apology and the memorial, because I think we need to look at ourselves. And, you know, I think it was maybe Judith said earlier, it's still human nature. You know, there are still, you know, obviously we don't do the witch trials, but we've still got an issue with picking people out at times. And I think it's really fascinating to look at that. So that's a really good steer. Thank you, Mary. So we've got a couple of questions here. The first one is from Lynn Genevieve, who has been commenting fantastically through the whole event. Definitely worth scrolling back and having a look at what she's been saying. But her question for all is, Anecdotally, in midwifery circles, there's a lot of talk about midwives being burned as witches. She's surprised that she hasn't heard about any particular witches and is wondering if there are any famous cases of midwives, if anybody knows of any. I'll let you have a think about that just for a second. And I would just mention, Claire, what's the thing that you're involved with?
Yeah, well, we're involved with.
We're involved with. I haven't made it to a meeting yet, but you have.
Because you are teaching at that time.
Yeah, working at that time, yeah.
So we're in the steering group of a research that's going to come out later on this year in relation to research done by fantastic women who are looking at the history of nursing in Scotland and looking at the people who can be identified as midwives or as healers. And they're pulling all that together in a report which is going to come out. And there has been involvement of from the Royal College of Nursing, and there's also involvement from the Midwifery Council, I think. But it's a really in-depth research. I've been along to 3 or 4 steering group meetings, and I'm absolutely blown away at the amount of work that they have done. And in one particular thing, Judith, as you raised about maps, was tracing back people, trying to trace back even trying to identify what herbs it was they grew from areas on the maps that were named as certain things. So hopefully that question will be answered in a huge amount of detail in a few months. We're hoping that that research is going to come out before the end of the year, and I think maybe scheduled for kind of like autumn.
And Judith, you were waving your hand there. Do you have an answer?
I'm a bit passionate about this. You know, people are going to hate me.
No.
Okay, but see, what I found a statistic yesterday, actually, because I've been looking into this for a while. Apparently in Scotland, 0.01% of accused witches or witches that were tried were midwives. The figure for charmers is around about 25%. Yeah. So what it seems to show is that it wasn't these people's professions that got them into trouble. It was the way they behaved. So if there's a sort of a malevolent act, if they've committed some kind of malevolent act or have been seen to do that, that's why they're accused. It's not because of what they do. I mean, there are times, obviously, when if you think a midwife is in the most private place and someone might, you know, shout during the throes of labour that the bairn's dad is not who everyone thinks the bairn's dad is. And in that case, someone might come after her because they want her silenced. But it doesn't seem to be in Scotland that it was the fact that they were a midwife or a charmer or healer that got them into trouble, especially with the charmers and the healers, because these people were important to society. You know, it was before medicine, so we needed them. But if that charmer was deemed to have cast a charm that caused harm, I think it was Mary that said something about the difference between charming and harming earlier, then that was what got them accused. But the Marat Gold relative of mine that I found, she was a healer and accused of witchcraft. So that was a big pointy nose thing at me, you know, like saying, you said that we don't get accused. Well, here you go. But no, it's apparently 0.01% of midcraft.
It's an interesting aspect that of the current chat about witches, that a lot of people choose to believe, we were talking about this before about reinforcing myths and stories, people choose to believe that the majority of women that were accused were healers, were working with herbs, were wise women, you know, and the statistics just doesn't seem to bear that out generally. And I think it's a nice story, but I don't think that it's really accurate. And Mary, you had your hand up, and then Norah had her hand up. So Mary, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, just agreeing with everything Judith said, but also within the records, it depends, again, it's down to winners, and it depends who's writing what down, whether or not you would define yourself as a midwife. You might be a midwife, but you also might be the wife of the local maltman, and your occupation could be listed as being a maltman. Or you might be a midwife, but you might also be a something else, because you're not a midwife 24 hours. So although it is a very, very small minority, I think the number of women who have classed themselves as, whoops, bless you, whoever that was, you might class yourself as a midwife, but that might not be all that you do. So it's a little bit difficult. It has become the myth that midwives were picked on. Because obviously because women took care of children if children died, that was where that sort of comes from. But often the numbers are difficult. There are, and we have so many lists of people just being accused and their occupation is not listed at all. So that's where it becomes a little bit confusing. But certainly, yeah, the reason you're arrested is because you're being quarrelsome. You may or may not be a midwife, but it's the quarrelsomeness, it's the act, it's the accusation. That's.
Yeah. And Norah, you were going to say something there. Oh,
hear me now?
Yep.
Yes,
yeah. There are some mentions of healing in the Kirchhofen cases, and the healing in the first case, which is Beatrix Watson, she was accused of going to heal the farmer's wife because she had previously cast a spell, because she had previously cursed her. Right, so when she and her husband, who was never accused, although his brother was, and his wife and daughter were, but he went with her to the farmhouse, and she held the sick woman's arms and pitter-pattered some words that the witness couldn't hear. And in another case, which was, I think it was Margaret Bell. She said when the boy didn't come to keep her cows, when he fell ill, she went to the house and she said, "God save him," 3 times, and then muttered some other words. And that reminded me of Agnes Sampson, because I used to teach using the documents from the North Berwick Witches case. And if you look at the incantation that she was accused of saying, it is the Lord's Prayer in Scots. It's a form of words, and the idea that forms of words mattered and that they carried spiritual and worldly power with them is strongly connected to Catholic belief. There's nothing explicitly Catholic in any of those cases, but the idea that prayers were powerful by being repeated in the right words in the right order certainly does linger in the background there.
And Noelle Harrison actually mentioned Agnes Sampson there, saying that she believed that Agnes Sampson was midwife, that she was part of the witch trials headed by James VI, and that her story was recorded in News from Scotland, a contemporary.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, so it's just that we've got that coming in.
There's another feature of News from Scotland, which it creeps into the Kirchhofen cases and the cases in the Dalkeith Presbytery area, and that is a male ringleader. Because there was a man, I forget his name, he had a name and a nickname in the News from Scotland pamphlet, who was depicted as the one who organised the coven and the meetings and so on. And although William Scott in Kirchhofen was only accused of the individual pact with the devil, and he was a man who was roped in because his family was involved, there's a suspicion in my mind that it was always useful to have a male figure to pick on, because it proved that women had to be led, really. And that's all I have to say at the moment.
We touched on that before. I think we were speaking to Julian Goodare, and he said
yes.
even when women were arranging covens, they shouldn't be allowed to do that alone. So they always had a man in there doing something. So that, but he wasn't ever involved in anything, usually sexual with the devil. That didn't happen because he wouldn't do that. So there was this a gender divide that even in this fantasy world that they've made up, men still had to have a higher status than women.
Yes.
Heather was in fact part of the discussion. I think you had a part of the discussion with the group from Napier University research, or under the auspices of Napier University. They contacted you, didn't they? I think they got one Bessie mixed up with another, perhaps.
Yes, well, this is one of the problems, isn't it? There are so many names that are the same. And I can't remember the name of of the person who contacted me now, but she was part of the Napier research that Claire's involved in, because she wanted information about Bessie Graham. Now, Bessie Graham of Kilwinning is the person that I've written about. But as we were having this discussion, it soon became very clear that she was talking about a totally different Bessie Graham. And that would be Bessie Graham of Dumfries. So although I wasn't able to give her any information about Bessie Graham of Kilwinning as a healer, which Bessie Graham of Dumfries was, it was a very useful conversation to untangle the Bessie Grahams and make sure that Napier didn't go chasing the wrong Bessie Graham when they were doing their research.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Heather.
Now we've got another thing here where Caroline Anderson is asking, to Catherine in particular, have you heard of the case in 1880 in Skye of a mother and daughter who were accused by the Free Kirk at Uig? Am I saying that right? Is it Uig? Uig. By evil arts take the milk from their neighbours. This was cited by Henderson, The Witchcraft and Folk Belief in the Age of Enlightenment in 2016. No other information of the outcome. Have you heard of that one?
Yes. So, 1880 Skye, and particularly in Uig, was a horrific place to be. A guy called Captain William Fraser had bought the whole parish with compensation money from slavery. He was a nasty man. Just to give you an idea, living in that time period was kind of like the last big push on clearance in that area. It was a turbulent time for people living there. That man would accuse anyone of anything. Very, very lucky we've got state papers in Skye, and as much as it's a master she's been going through looking at these women, how they were protesting against him. I've heard that one, and I believe they've thrown that against the women as a way to kind of ostracize her in the community. There's another case where a woman is abandoned by her husband, so he boards up her house and chucks her out to be destitute in the community. There's another case where a woman lives with 3 children. This is all from the same township. Her husband leaves her, she's abandoned, and he does the same. So that's just, again, patriarchal male money in, buys over. I'm going to get rid of all these tutors. There's, that collection. I think if I can get through that collection in the next however many years I'm an archivist, I'll find more examples like that. People were starving. She stole something to eat, and they've just pointed the finger at her. So it's just the same as today. She was made an outcast because of her social status. That area is fascinating. The guy, he caused a lot of problems. He chucked loads more people out off into America and Australia. And there was a great flood in Uig about 20 years before, in the 1870s. And this flood came down from where the Fairy Glen is now and flooded his huge house, his grand house, and all the bodies came up from the graveyard. And the locals said it was an act of God for his treatment of the people.
Oh,
so dark.
Dreadful.
Doesn't sound like that long ago, but yeah, that's where that one comes from. She was starving.
Oh. And then we've got a question from Fiona here, who we talked to, I think, quite a lot on Twitter with Fiona. And she's asking if we've had any other thoughts on the proposed museum. Now, the proposed museum that she is referencing there is that Claire put a thing up on Twitter just sort of idly one night asking if people would, have an interest in a museum. And then we got thousands of people getting back in touch saying, yes. But I mean, we can't build a museum ourselves, but we are interested in talking with different partners, and we've had some talks with different people. So we are kind of working away on that, but we can't say too much just now. But it's definitely something that is of interest in various towns. Actually, it's not just one group, but a few people have approached us from different places, because of course there's several places in Scotland that feel that they've got the strongest claim to have a witch trials museum because the biggest story is in their town. So I don't know how that'll pan out. But one of the points that you're making here is about Fiona, is it unlikely due to a lack of artifacts? What do our researchers here think about what you would actually need in a museum. You know, for you, what do you think would be imperative in a museum?
I think information. I think the archives that we've been talking about, if they could somehow be pooled and exhibited together. There's lots of gory pieces that survive, you know, of stocks and bridles and all the rest of it that were used to torture witches. I don't know how people feel about seeing them. I think somewhere where all the names were gathered together, that felt important for me, to have maybe a room. And then we've talked about cremains before, and what to do with them. And it seems that there are, Brechin Museum apparently, they hold cremains and ankle bones and things like that, and a piece of chain from that they dug up when they were building the gasworks. Now they're just in a shoebox somewhere.
That's horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's not, I mean, that doesn't seem to be that unusual. And you think if we could have some kind of idea about what to do with these, you know, where to bury these. Do you bury them in a churchyard or somewhere like that? Would they have wanted that? Or is there somewhere in a museum where they could maybe be housed together and not necessarily on show, but people would know that, you know, they had been given some kind of burial under the ground or something. But there's lots, I think there's lots of information that could, there's loads, loads of art.
Think so. Partly what Fiona sort of suggests there is what Claire and I've talked about before as well, that alongside other artifacts, I mean, I personally wouldn't be super keen on a place that was, and you're not saying this, Judith, but on a place that had lots of torture instruments. I think that's really distasteful. And I think that sometimes sort of museums often go down that kind of route, and it's kind of Halloweenian aspect, which I really want to get away from. But I think that there's a place for things like recreating. I mean, I've got children, so in the past we used to go to museums, but places that recreate what life is like, so that people that visit can make a connection with, they were people like we're people. So that sort of thing, which wouldn't necessarily be an artifact as such, but something that brings history to life. Mary, are you going to say something?
Yeah, there's I don't know if anybody's been out to the Great War place at Thiepval in France, and what they have is it's a massive big place, obviously, and they have one room where what they've done is they've taken 1,000 photographs and made them into passport size and just put them on a wall with all the names. What I think would be lovely would be if we could collect as many of the names we could, put those names up, and then reach out to the artistic community in Scotland and say, can you draw as that person?
Yeah.
So we've got a face to the name. And yes, we'll have all, you know, the information, and, you know, if you really want to go and see what a witch's bridal was like, there it is in the other room. But to dignify them with a face, so they've got the name and they've got the face. You know, I asked the artistic community of Scotland to come together, so that you've got artists from Forfar drawing the Forfar witches, you've got artists from Corstorphine drawing the Corstorphine witches. And I think that would be a nice way to just bring it all together.
There's some mention in the chat as well about the memorial in Norway, and I was also thinking about the memorial, well, the museum in America, I think it's in Washington, that's for African American history and history of enslaved people in America, and they've done some really beautiful, moving things. I think what's really important is that although there's lots of community groups across Scotland and there's lots of unofficial memorials and museums and things, I'd like to see one that's a really well-funded, organized, thoughtful, forward-thinking in many ways as well, put together collection that people that come to Scotland and people from Scotland can go into and like have ownership of their history, and that should be really organized at a very high level, which is something that Claire and I are working really hard to make happen. And it'd be really great if people that were interested in that could get in touch, that have got different areas of expertise. We've had various people that have been in touch already, sort of professors of curatorship and internationally renowned artists, but people like that have been in touch, because we want it to be something that is beautiful.
Yes.
Something that is hard hitting, and something that is, you know, up there with any of these really fantastic ones that exist, not just for witchcraft, but just other appalling moments in human history, so that people can really connect with that in our country. So I personally feel really passionately that that's something we're very much driving for, and that's been talked about from the beginning of our campaign. It's always been a really important part of it, that it's something that people can connect with now.
I think something that showed or demonstrate that you can physically see that would make you understand how small Scotland's population was at the time, and then the huge number of people accused. I mean, we know they weren't all executed, but even an accusation could stick with you for life. It was enough to have you banished. There's a case in Forfar where the person wasn't allowed to go near Kirriemuir, Montrose, Brechin, Forfar, or within 8 miles of all these places, so you can't see any of your family again, or you'll be arrested and thrown back in jail. So something that could show the numbers of the actual accused in relation to the size of the population, I think would be very moving.
And one thing I think that's worth mentioning as well is that we've spoken to several artists already on the podcast. So we've spoken to Karen Strang, we had Laura Graham, we had Amy Kingsmill who's down in London, who's doing this amazing funded thing that's with performance art as well. So we're really keen on talking to different artists, that are able to talk about their interpretations of things, which I think is really interesting. And also there's so many fiction writers. So I think there's something that can be done that can be amazing and captivating.
Shout out in particular, Karen Strang's got a new exhibition on at the moment called Succubus, and that's on in her local area. And if you just put in karenstrang.com, I think it comes up with her webpage, and that'll tell you all about it. And Laura Graham, whose work, she is a lawyer turned artist, who is working at the moment both in the UK and also has a show in Ingolstadt. She has done 3 different works so far, I think, called Soul Murder, and those examine the witchcraft trials quite from a legal perspective. One of her installations is 2 modern day lawyers reading out the accusations that women were accused of, just over and over, all the different accusations. And some of them are so odd. I remember you're just reading them and you're thinking, you did go out on a boat and get drunk and then were involved in witchcraft, or you did, it's just the stories of, again, women acting a wee bit outside their gender norms sometimes, like doing things that they shouldn't have been doing, going on boats, getting drunk. Her work is really really beautiful, and if anyone has a chance to see it, please go on Laura Graham's website and look at Soul Murder. And at the picture of a woman made of iron, which she takes down to a beach, and she the inside of the body is made up of people's accusations that she asks in the modern day. They write those accusations down and put them inside her, and then the body is burned. She called the person Agnes, but it's a beautiful piece of art as well. So she's also trying to draw together a number of artists at the moment, isn't she, Zoe? To try and bring out a sort of large-scale artworks in relation to witches as well. So we'll be doing a shout out for that, no doubt, in the future too.
Yes, that gathers pace. Catherine, you were going to say something, and then Nora's going to say something too. So Catherine, what was your thing?
I was going to say, I think there's definitely a taste for something contemporary on witchcraft and what's happened in the past, so people can learn from it and also open up these discussions. It's something to talk about. So we show young people a letter or an artifact and say, what would you do? Why do you think this happened? Just to get them thinking about it in their own opinion, why somebody might be accused of that. But I think just from my own work, there's a couple of artists I've been working with just over the last year. One's, she's based in Glasgow, called Natsumi. She's from Japan. She did a project on rowan trees and the connection between these folklore stories and where she's from, Japan, and in Scotland. And we've been chatting about a few other ones. So there's lots of stuff kind of brewing. So I think it's a really good time to get something nationally in Scotland there.
Brewing, appropriate phrase. Brewing being the appropriate word.
Hi.
And Norah, were you going to say something there?
Yes, in 1998, I saw an exhibition in the Townhouse in Aberdeen, which in some ways I've seen very few like it since. And finally, it was in one way a prime example of how not to do it. But at the time, in the late 1990s, I've seen several of these displays, well, lots of displays where you have stuffed figures in museums, human figures in a domestic life setting and things like that. They're not statues, they're not made of wood or stone, but they're plaster figures arranged in a domestic setting. In Aberdeen, they had the additional refinement that there was a projection onto the face of a speaking face and a recording, so that the figures seemed to come to life, and the lips moved and so on, but it was someone modern's face. And I believe that the display in the Aberdeen Townhouse Museum was of that kind. I mean, maybe I'm putting things together from different museums, but what they did to me was utterly wrong. As you approached it, coming up the stairs, there was a recording of women crying. Mm. Oh, that really freaked me out. And I went and complained about it. I said, you know, that is too emotional. That is too awful. You know, you really should turn off that soundtrack. But as you got to the room, it resolved itself into different people speaking. And you could have, well, as I say, the words in the Christopher minutes are not the words of the accused directly. They're the words attributed to the accused by the interrogators. So again, the Aberdeen example is not a terribly good one if they're saying what was said about them rather than what they said themselves. But some combination of those ideas might be useful for a new museum.
Thanks, Norah. That's great.
So this is why I love the idea of independent researchers all over Scotland bringing these women's stories to light, because all we really have is the accusations written down, but then we have their so-called confessions. And these are not the words of these women or these people. These are the words of the person writing them down, who's a male. And I think if we can somehow bring those characters back to life and tell their stories, and you know, we still have the written transcripts that are written by the men, but the individual stories are not going to be formulated because all the transcripts are formulated, the confession.
Sabrina Willikins, who's a great supporter, we have loads of chat with her on Twitter. Hello, Sabrina, has said some really great points here and saying that for the museum, it would be good to highlight lives and how normal the accused were, which I think, again, goes back to that idea. I think it's been fantastic today, and we really are so glad that all our speakers are able to join us. We didn't charge for today, and as a result of that, because we don't make any money from this at all, our lovely speakers all gave up their time for free, which thank you so much, because we know you're all really busy, you're all doing your own things, and we really, really appreciate it so much, because it's been incredibly illuminating for everybody. It's been really good. We'll put together a bunch of stuff that's going to be useful. Heather, if you can send on your top tips, that'd be fab. And then any other books or publications that anybody here that thinks is useful, please do send it to us. We're still beavering away on the pardon and the apology and the memorial for the campaign. We're a national and, in fact, in many ways, international organisation that are very focused on taking Scotland into the future and reckoning with this past. So please keep supporting us. And we're hopeful that the parliamentary people will see that it's just quite straightforward. It doesn't need to be a big hassle. And it would be really great just to keep talking to people on our social media and so on. Please do drop us a line if there's anything that you missed today or you'd like to find out about. And we'll be using some of the recordings from today in upcoming podcasts. So if you have people that weren't able to come today or they didn't get a ticket, then please do let them know there'll be an opportunity to catch up to a certain extent. Claire, have you got anything you'd like to say? Sound like Mrs. Venditozzi there. Claire, have you got anything you'd like to say?
Sorry, unmuting myself. No, I'd just like to echo what Zoe has said. Thank you so much for giving up your time. Your work is inspirational. If it means that people pick up books and engage in the same way with their past, then we can't hope for anything better than that, because it's understanding our past that makes us hopefully look to the future and be better. I don't know, Mary, if you want to say anything. Everyone's saying thanks very much, lots and lots of thanks and stuff like that.
Just one thing to say is that this is very much about Scotland's past, our dark past, and what we need to do about it. But in case anybody doesn't think this is important, in 2019, there was a man in Fiji who accused a local woman of witchcraft, of killing his family, and she was killed. In 2018, there were something like 2,000 people executed for witchcraft around the world. So this really matters now,
absolutely,
as well as in the past. So it is important for all sorts of aspects.
It's important that we signal to the rest of the world that we realise this was a bad time and it shouldn't happen. And we've worked with Leo Igwe from Advocacy for the Accused. Have I got that name right, Claire, the name of the organisation? So he's working away on the continent of Africa with different areas there where it's problematic, but it's horrible. It's just still ongoing, and it's generally the vulnerable. So it's important that we band together. But the performance that you're going to see now is from Heal Harrow, who have created this amazing body of work that they're going to release soon, that's about working with the writer Mary Kidd, who we had on as a very early podcast guest, and then we had Heal Harrow on themselves as guests as well. Obviously, I can't remember what number of podcasts.
Mary Kidd was podcast 3, and Heal and Harrow were podcast 19.
Perfect. So they're very kindly giving us a sneak preview of the work that they've made. And I think if Claire is able to press play in some way, you can watch that now. So thank you very much for joining us, all our speakers.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it greatly. I'm just about to share the screen, and we'll be played out by Heal Harrow, who will speak to us.
Hi there, thanks so much to Zoe and Claire for inviting us to be part of this day. I'm Rachel Newton and this is Lauren McCall, and together we are working on a new multidisciplinary work called Heal Harrow, and we'll be taking it out on tour next year and releasing an album as well. So if you'd like to keep in touch, please join our mailing list over on our website at www.healandharrow.com, and we can let you know when all of that is happening.
For this project, we've been working with the amazing author Mary Kidd, and she's written 10 stories which take a closer look at the lives of those affected by the witch trials. And we'll play you a track now. It's very much a sneak preview of the project, and it's called Behind the Eyes, a story which imagines a life for the great witch of Balwearie, Margaret Aitken.
Thank you everyone for joining. I'm sure you'll agree with us. That was an absolutely beautiful piece of music, and really, really moving just to sit there in a moment's quiet reflection and just think about the past. So thank you everyone for joining us. For those that didn't get to hear it, we'll be able to, hopefully with the assistance of my brother, chop it up and put our speakers on the podcast. So we will tag you all in and let you know when you're back in that again. And please just do stay in contact with your researchers. Let us know what you're doing so we can let other people know about it. And if you're starting your researches, do get in contact with us. And I'm sure Norah and Judith and everyone else that's on Twitter. I think everyone's on Twitter. Heather, are you on Twitter as well? No, she's not on Twitter. But the rest of the speakers today are, I think, all on Twitter, and all enjoy tweeting about things like witchcraft. So if you want to ask them any particular questions, having heard them speak today, then I'm sure they would speak to you about that. So Zoe, anything else you want to say just before we go?
Just thanks so much for coming along today, and thanks for being involved. And as ever, it's really brilliant. And I just want to reinforce the fact that this is a community of us that are all working together, and it's really nice that we're working together, and hopefully we can move mountains.
And one last thing on behalf of Norah. Norah says, I didn't mention that my pamphlet called The Different Village will be published soon by the Carstorphine Trust and available via their website, and just holding it up. And I have a copy already, and it's brilliant. I read it while I was up in Orkney, so thank you so much for that. So I don't know what the weather's like now. It was gorgeous when we started off this. It's probably raining by now, but I wish everyone a very, very good Sunday.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us